Good evening and welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting of February 11th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So please note that this meeting is televised. It's streaming live right now, and it's also available on ECAT and online through the ECAT's website. So our first item is one-day liquor license for the Children's Museum, 6th annual Night at the Bruseum. If you want to come up. The Children's Museum has applied for a one-day beer and wine liquor license for the 6th annual Night at the Bruseum Craft Beer Expo nonprofit fundraiser to be held August 10th, 2019 at the Children's Museum from 3:30 p.m. to 7 o'clock p.m. 2 Easton Police Department details and 1 Easton Fire and Rescue firefighter/EMT detail, and appropriate equipment is required for this event. So Amy Walsh is here to tell us a little bit about it.
Hi, yes. So I am the newest member of the Children's Museum team. I'm the Director of Development. And this year, the only slight change to the event that we are requesting is a start time of 3:30, as we are exploring the option of doing a VIP ticket with early admission. So we're excited about that. Other than that, the event will be as it has in the past. We have some sponsorships already lined up, and we're starting to reach out to breweries, although I wanted to have this meeting first. And let's see, we'll be working with the same folks that we've worked with in the past for parking, our friends over at the YMCA and the Historical Society, and Doug King has been very generous in the past as well, letting us use his spaces. The event will once again be ticketed at $35 a ticket. Those will be available on our website, not quite yet, still a little early, but soon. We'll start publicly promoting it in the next couple of months as it sells out every year, and hopefully this year we'll have some additional traction with the VIP tickets as well. And then there's also sponsorship opportunities starting at, as I think the $300 is an entry-level sponsorship. We have some great sponsors already lined up, and we're reaching out to more, some new people, both in town and not. So it'll be a lot of fun, I think. I wasn't there last year, but I've heard very good things about it.
It was a lot of fun last year. Tom, do you want to?
It was. As my fellow board members know, I'll be recusing myself from the vote tonight because I'm actually lucky enough to be on the Bruseum committee, something I joined several years ago. I think we all know the amazing work that the museum does here in Easton for all of our children and for the community at large. And this is one of their largest fundraising events. It really brings the community together in an awesome way. And I think it just adds a tremendous amount of value both for the Children's Museum to get their name out, but also for the community to get everybody together. So welcome on board.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you officially.
Come on over and visit us. You can have a tour of all of the new changes we've made. This event, yes, it is our largest fundraiser. Last year we raised more than $37,000. This year I'm hoping to raise an additional $17,000.
Very ambitious.
I feel pretty confident. So, you know, it might be the biggest and best year yet.
Great. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, would somebody like to make a motion to extend the one-day liquor license with the conditions August 10th, which is my birthday, so maybe I'll have to stop by, from 3:30 to 7 o'clock, 2 Easton Police Department details, 1 Easton Fire and Rescue detail, and appropriate equipment required for the event.
So moved. Second?
All in favor? 4 yes, and Tom abstaining. And then the next item is the road closure for the Children's Museum. There's an attached letter submitted by the board by Amy on behalf of the Children's Museum for a temporary street closure. As proposed, a portion of Sullivan Ave will be closed on Saturday, August 10th from 3:30 to 7 for the 6th annual Night at the Bruseum. The police and the fire chiefs have reviewed the request and recommend the details as indicated above under the liquor license application. So you do this every year also? They go
Yes,
hand
I
in hand?
believe they started it, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a few years ago, 3 or 4 years
It
ago,
was.
they started closing the road. And it's just that stretch of Sullivan Ave that's right in front of the museum.
And Dottie, what's the mechanism for making sure, is it on Amy and the museum's responsibility to reach out to the police department to confirm everybody is lined up in terms of engaging along with the fire and rescue. I believe that's how it works.
I'm not sure, Connor?
I'm sorry, my computer was freezing when I was trying to pull the notes
It's
up.
okay.
Was your-
Who
could
was
you repeat the
supposed to
question?
reach out to the police and fire to make sure everything is scheduled?
Oh,
It's
well,
the-
so that letter came in, we send it to the police and fire department to see if they have any comments up front, and then they respond, and we relay that back to the applicant to schedule the appropriate details as needed
Great. And
directly with the police
I would
department.
just recommend on the museum's part, it might not hurt at all to reach out proactively a
Yes.
couple days before the event, just to
Just to
double check to
confirm.
make sure
That's-
everybody is lined up.
Very good advice, thank you.
Certainly.
Anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, would somebody like to make a motion to vote for the road closure request for the Children's Museum, August 10th, 3:30 to 7 o'clock?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? 4 yes, and Tom abstained.
Thank you
So
all
thank you
very much.
and good
Thank
luck
you.
with
Hope to
your
see you
event.
all on August 10th.
We will, honey, we will.
Thank you.
Okay, up next is the acceptance of a resignation from the Planning and Zoning Board. We received a memo from Town Clerk Danielle Sicard indicating that Charles Marlowe has recently resigned as an alternate member from the Planning and Zoning Board. So we're advising for the vacancy, which has a term expiration of June 30th, 2020. And we thank Charlie for his work on the Planning Board. He was a great contributor, and we'll be sorry to see him go. So we need to take a roll call vote to accept that resignation. So if somebody'd like to make a motion.
So moved.
Second,
King, Mallow.
Broussard, Mallow.
Barger, Mallow.
Full Janetti Malo?
David, Mills, Mela.
Okay, great. So next, we have an appointment to the Human Resources Board, and that is Jennifer Campanella. Is Jennifer here? Are we expecting Jennifer to come in tonight?
I believe we were. I believe she was invited.
Okay. Should I hold off on that and come back to it, or should we?
You can, there's plenty else on the agenda.
Okay, why don't we give that a little while, just in case we sometimes go through the beginning items pretty quickly, so if somebody's a little bit late, we'll come back to that one. Just remind me if I forget. The vote to authorize the town administrator to execute the Clean Water Trust loan application for septic repair loan program.
Sure, so in your packet, you have some paperwork associated with the septic repair program that the Board of Health currently administers. As the board will recall, a few years ago, town meeting voted to authorize, back in 2014, up to $1 million in borrowing for this program. This is basically a program administered by the Board of Health where folks who have septic tanks in failure or are looking to pay the private costs of connecting into a public sewer can borrow at a low interest rate through the Board of Health using state funds to do that work. We sought $500,000 of that total $1 million appropriation when the project kicked off in 2014. This is the second half of that 2014 appropriation. In order for the town to avail itself and to pass those loan opportunities on to property owners, we need to file an application with a Clean Water Trust. The Collector Treasurer, Linda Hawks, has filed the appropriate paperwork in your packet. We have a specific motion for the board to consider authorizing me to basically sign that paperwork and submit it on behalf of the town. And Linda is here if you have any questions about the program.
I'm just curious about how many people have actually availed themselves of that over the course of the last 4 years.
That's a great question, and I'm sorry, but I don't have the number off the top of my head. But it has been used, it's been taken well advantage of by virtue of the fact that half of it has already been committed.
Not necessarily for consideration today, but for future consideration, given the fact that we have a lot of activity with the sewer districts about to come. Would this be something that we have to consider getting more available for us in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe that the Director of Health actually submitted a placeholder for the annual town meeting warrant for us to consider just that. So we'll be reviewing that more closely in the coming weeks and months leading up to producing a final warrant for town meeting.
Excellent.
So the motion is in the packet. This is just a motion to authorize you to file the application and execute the agreements.
That's right.
Okay. So do you want to make the motion, Craig? Or Tom? Do you see where it is?
Motion to authorize Town Administrator Connor Reed on behalf of the Town of Easton to file applications and execute agreements regarding and performing any and all other actions necessary to secure for the town such loans for the construction or planning of water pollution abatement projects as may be made available to the town pursuant to the provisions of the Massachusetts Clean Water Act and the Water Pollution Abatement Revolving Loan Program for the Septic Loan Replacement and Repair Program.
I'll second that.
Any questions? All in favor? Unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have an update from the Audit Committee. Mr. Berkowitz, if you want to come up and introduce yourself. While you get settled in, I just wanted to talk about the role of the Audit Committee. For people that don't know, the Audit Committee shall serve as an advisor to the Board of Selectmen with respect to the town's financial management systems and controls and annual audit. In addition, the Audit Committee shall make an annual report to the town on matters within the scope of its jurisdiction. Specific duties shall include, but are not limited to, the following. 1, make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen on the selection of and scope of services for the independent auditor. 2, review the annual financial statements and management reports prepared by the independent auditor and make recommendations with respect thereto. 3, make recommendations for areas of operations where expanded scope audits or review of internal controls may be appropriate. 4, review and make recommendations with respect to the town's financial management practices and controls through the town administrator. Review with appropriate boards and departments opportunities to improve such practices and controls. And 5, report to the Board of Selectmen on the status of recommendations of the committee and/or independent auditor has made during the preceding 12 months. And 6, submit a summary of their work for the preceding calendar year for inclusion in the town's annual report. So,
thank you. I want to talk about 2 different things. The first thing is the annual town audits. Currently, Melanson Heath is the town's CPA firm, and at our last 2 meetings, we looked at the 6/30/17 draft and the 6/30/18 draft, and it's important to note why we looked at one and then the other back to back, and that's just to let everyone know that every other year the town has to go through an actuarial audit and the valuation, and Wendy works tirelessly with the town accountants to get that done. So every other year it'll be a little bit late, and I think we've improved, or we are in the steps of improving.
It should be it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay.
next year.
So we
I
just
think you need to be at the microphone.
did get through the 6/30/18ths. One of the things that the town has or will consider adopting is the some of the new GASB regs, and one of them is to put the deferred portion of the long-term deferred, it's really retirement and pension, on the budget, not on the budget, excuse me, on the financials. And they're there right now, and they stick out like a sore thumb. They're really big numbers. However, it is a good representation of what the liabilities the town has.
Sure.
And it's around $150 million, but that's long term. We asked the partners at Melanson Heath if our current liability, not the deferred amount, is covered by the budget. It's about 5%, and I believe they said that puts us in line with some, just about every other town.
Right.
So it looks like a scary big number, but it really isn't when you consider the current deferred liabilities. Of course, it's unfunded, so which means we don't have the money in the bank to pay for that amount, but we can service it out of the budget.
Okay.
So we've been through the 6/30/17, 6/30/18. Melanson Heath has been our town auditor for about 20 years. 18 years, excuse me. And the only recommendation we had, because the town's going through, a change in accounting practices and an additional change in presentation, the financial statements, that we do want to move forward with Melanson Heath. I think similar firms that do this charge a lot more. I think our recommendation is the partner who's been servicing us for those 18 years, we asked him to do it for 1 more year, but we'd like a change in partners, same firm, same senior manager, but we do think it's a good practice to move to a different partner.
Okay, great.
So that's our recommendation, and I believe we said we recommended 3% growth a year, Wendy?
Wendy Nightingale, Finance Director. Yes, we recommended an increase not to exceed 3% for each of the 3 years. So that contract, it's not before you tonight. At another meeting, we will get a draft contract together for you to award the audit contract to Melanson Heath for the next 3 years.
Okay.
Thanks, Wendy. Wendy is at all of our meetings, and we have perfect attendance. It's a great committee. And Chuck's been on it, but I'd like to thank Roberta Verville from Finance Committee, Jennifer Starr at large, and Nancy DeLuca from the school committee. It's a very professional group, and we work well together. It's pretty much all business. So I think next I'd like to get to the operational audit, and we have some recommendations on that as well. I believe the Selectmen and Connor all have a copy. There were some, really the focus of what I want to talk about tonight is the financial end and the recommendations by Abrahams, and they were the auditor for this. I believe the cost of the operational audit was a little bit south of $70,000. And that's a pretty substantial, one-time expense. The column on the left, Abrahams indicated that if we follow recommendations, we would save about $637,000 annually. The biggest chunk of that was changing and increasing the employee's contribution to health insurance, and as everybody knows, that's negotiated, and will come up as it goes along. I mean, we don't believe you can gain probably zero increase in a current year over long term when you shift dollars around. I mean, you're betting that that the health care goes up by more than the salaries, so it's not something you'd earn right away. So once you take that out, you take your 636 less 408, and you're starting with about $200,000 in savings. But we did look at each
Well, I think
edition.
that's an important thing to mention is that, any changes to some of these things, like healthcare benefits, those are part of collective bargaining agreements. So that's not something that the town can just decide to do and go for savings, and it takes a while to talk about those. And then also one of the things, that's important to remember is these are audit recommendations, but the town has to decide with its people and its department heads and employees about what the culture and values are of our town and what's important. So some of these things, they're certainly worth looking at, but at the end of the day, we have to realize what the value is, more than dollars and cents sometimes.
Well, we recognize that as well, and also the importance of exactly elected officials and town management making those decisions. That being said, the report did not uncover any gross mismanagement or any accounts that wouldn't behave as you'd believe. Everything seemed to be online. Before I get into the specifics and go line by line, I think there were certain things that after talking to the school committee and our representative, Nancy DeLuca, that we don't believe that the audit firm understood things you could eliminate and things you couldn't. I think one of them was the 17th bus, which we didn't eliminate and we couldn't for reasons, or the situations. Some of them wanted to save on. They thought we had an additional custodial person in the schools, which we didn't. But for the most part, I think on some of the smaller things, there were some cost savings, and I'll go over what the town did to follow up. One of the recommendations was to increase the athletic base fee from $150 to $200. We did that. We raised $44,000 in revenue as opposed to the $60,000. The contract cleaning services, again, it was a big number, about the $150,000, which they thought we could save, and that's just not a reality. because they didn't understand what we had in place.
Sure.
So the lunch price increase, they had a savings of $15,000. We actually did increase it and saved $25,000. Some of the added costs that they put in, we followed. We added a police detective by a promotion, and that cost us less than they thought it would, just by a couple thousand. And same with the fire chief. So, you know, in a funny way, the $637,000 that was recommended that we saved, it wound up being actually going the other way, and we spent an additional $92,000, which is pretty insignificant when compared to the total budget.
Sure.
And it leads us to believe that, you know, we're pretty close to being, at least from a financial situation, managed pretty well according to the operational audit. I mean, I think our committee read it as a bill of health for the town. I mean, you can always, you know, like you said, nitpick on certain things and certain values, but we're not going to go there. We weren't willing to go there. So that brought us to the recommendation about future funding of an operational audit. So right now, Wendy advised us that it's not in the budget to be reserved. I mean, for $70,000 to do it every 10 years, you'd be reserving $7,000 a year, which we haven't been doing, and we recommended not to do it. A future committee down the road might want to look at certain items, but we did not vote to fund an operational audit at this time.
Great.
So one thing we did do, which I think had initial pushback from some on the school committee, and it certainly wasn't in the report, and that relates to in the schools parking fees. And you look at half the towns around us, more than half, have parking fees for students at the schools. You know, we talked about it as a committee. I mean, what's the right thing? And we had some school committee people come, and you know, I think from my own personal standpoint, I know one of the holes in our budgets that we funded through CPA has been the turf field. And while you can't fund dollar for dollar because it's not an enterprise fund, a student parking fee versus replacing turf on a field, even by a modest fee of $100, we recommended to the school department to put $100 in a year, which is less than every town that has it around us. And Nancy DeLuca had a spreadsheet. I just have one copy, but it's available upon circulation or upon request. I can give it. So if you raise $25,000, that would go about halfway to funding that. Again, it's not dollar for dollar. You can't do that, but you know, we thought that was reasonable, and we recommended that Nancy bring that to the school committee.
Okay.
So
Well, it's good to have a school committee person on there for that reason.
Nancy's great.
And of course, the school committee does their own part of the budget and looks at those things, so I'm sure that will be
It's
valuable information for their discussion.
It's just a recommendation. We're not here to
Sure.
manage. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Questions from the board?
Just one quick one. I don't see anything about the salaries. I know the Abrams Group did some sort of a analysis of the salaries, high, low, et cetera. Did you guys form any conclusions on that aspect?
No, again, I think we believe that that's town management, and that's beyond the purview. And again, it wasn't out of line with any of the surrounding towns said. So no, I mean, you were on the committee before. As I came on, you were leaving, so I don't know if you looked at that. But
I wasn't on the committee.
okay.
Yeah, I was just curious if you guys had
Okay.
dug into those.
We looked at them, and they seemed in line with
Okay.
other towns. You know, you could question the towns they selected, you know, but you know that it wasn't in our purview to look at the towns.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the work that you and the committee put forth.
Thanks.
All right,
Thank you, Dan.
excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Len. Appreciate it.
Dottie, I saw a couple more people enter the room. I don't know if one of them is here for the Human Resources Board interview.
Is Jennifer
Campanella?
Campanella come? Did Jennifer Campanella come in? Okay.
It's not.
The next up is the Department of Public Works fiscal year 2020 to 22 pavement management plan.
Good evening. Hello. Hopefully this comes up. Hey, it worked. All right, good evening. Dave Field, Director of Public Works. I'm here to give you a kind of a brief update of our overall pavement management plan. I'm just going to give you a review of what pavement management is, review what we did last year, look at our upcoming 3-year plan, and then talk about future funding and what impacts that might have on our level of service. So pavement management is doing the right thing at the right time, in the right place, and doing it the right way. It's made up of several components. One of the biggest ones is the road surface rating, and that's basically a numerical rating from 0 to 100, which represents the health of that road. And that's done by physically going out and surveying every road we have, looking at all the distresses, the extent and severity of those distresses, and boiling that down to a numerical number. We look at traffic volumes of each of those roads, the various construction methods that are appropriate for those roads. We use a software package to help us do that. And then the other item is budget, because we have a constrained budget, and so that really drives what roads get recommended. So this is a example of the repair bands. So starting at the top in green, from 90 to 100, that's your good road, it's a new road, and it doesn't need any work. And then as we slide down that RSR scale, we get to different levels of repairs, from routine maintenance like crack sealing, which is a very low-cost repair, to preventative maintenance, which we use as ultra-thin bonded overlay, which is called NovaChip as well. That's a more expensive repair, but still very cheap in the scheme of things. Then as we get worse into overlay, mill and overlay, and then to reclamation, once we get down into that red area, that's where a road really needs to be rebuilt, reclaimed, or reconstructed. And that's very expensive. Sure.
Is this an actual representation of our current road structure?
This is our bands right now.
So
yes.
50% of our roads are currently in the reclamation band?
No, I'm sorry. This is the repair bands that we're using. So it doesn't represent, but yes, we do have a significant portion. It's not 50, but it's close in that reclamation area.
Fair enough. So. Feels like a lot.
And the pavement management really comes down to benefit value, where we use the life improvement of a repair at a certain RSR. So if a road's in a certain band, it has an RSR, it has a repair cost and a life improvement with that repair cost and traffic. And that comes up to a benefit value calculation that we try to get. And usually it recommends the low-cost repairs on good roads are the first things that come up, because maintaining a road in good shape is a lot cheaper than letting that road slip all the way down into that very expensive reclamation or reconstruction area. So looking at what we did last year, in fiscal 19, we did just over $1 million worth of roads. The roads in blue are our routine maintenance, and that's just crack sealing. Then we move into preventative, which is yellow, and we did 3 separate portions of Bay Road with ultra-thin bonded overlay, or NovaChip. We then moved on to the mill and overlay, which is the orange. We did Beaver Dam Road, Allen Road, and a portion of Randall. And then we did reclamation on a small piece of Randall as well. And that all cost us about $1 million. And our current RSR after those repairs was 74. And that's pretty much where we started. We started with a 74 in fiscal year 15, which is the first real year we implemented this. And our current backlog is $18 million. So today, to fix all the roads that we need to fix and maintain them, we need $18 million. And that really hasn't changed either since we started the program. So some of the things we're doing, we're trying to use innovative techniques. We do use SuperPave, which is a superior performing asphalt pavement. Other communities have started going along with that as well, and the state has required it in all their projects. But we started this several years ago as well. It's just a better way, a better mix design. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's a better product. We also use quality assurance specifications. And what that is basically we're measuring with testing to see how their contractor performed, and we're paying them based on how they did perform. So smooth, dense, and uniform is how you want your asphalt, and we measure density and uniformity with in our specifications. If a contractor achieves a very high level, he gets paid the full amount. If he doesn't, then he gets less because the life of that road is going to be less. And then the other thing we've done was implement warm mix asphalt. I think we're in our third year now. Warm mix asphalt is not only a green way to produce asphalt, it's produced at a lower temperature. Producing it at the lower temperature also preserves the binder life of that liquid asphalt. The higher you heat it, the more you cook off those flexible properties of the asphalt. So by instead of making it at 350, we're producing it at 250 to 280. So we're preserving the life of that as well as being green.
So David, I just want to mention, I remember when you first brought some of these procedures forward, and the performance pricing is really important, because if they pave the road and it's not top quality, you can't have them tear it up and do it over again. So by making that performance piece of it, we got a lot of better quality from it, because they knew they were going to get a discount on their payments if it wasn't good, and then other towns have started to do it, but we were one of the first.
Yes, no, it's as soon as you start testing, you get a better product. So there's actually studies done, and I don't want to go too far off topic, but they studied the performance of a road without testing, and then just by going in your trunk and pulling out a box, they said, "Oh, he's doing something. They're going to do a better job." And it's actually true. When you test, you get a better product. So we're doing that, and we're actually getting an excellent product right now. So this is just a summary of all of our previous repairs since 2013. Again, pavement management didn't really start until 2015, but we've been tracking those repairs since 2013. And we've done just about $6.5 million worth of work. And it's pretty much all over town, as you can see. The colors are the same as I mentioned before. The blue is routine maintenance down to the red, which is reclamation. But the one thing you can see, aside from the routine maintenance on the subdivision roads, we've really only scratched the surface as far as major roads and collectors. We're not really getting into subdivisions or our smaller streets. We just can't get there. We have a huge backlog, and that's primarily those red roads, those reclamation roads, and we really haven't been able to scratch the surface of those roads yet.
But are you doing emergency repairs for those
Yes.
roads if they have?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, we patch potholes, and we do some limited repairs all over town. If there's a problem, we'll patch it. But as far as repaving, we really have limited abilities to get in and do the roads we need to do. Every year we leave $17 million worth of roads untouched as far as our paving plan goes, which is unfortunate. So any paving management plan really relies on what your anticipated funding is. You can see in the orange we have what we've spent since 2015. That averages just to be about $1 million a year. And in the brown you can see we're going to be funding $1 million in fiscal year 20, and then $500,000 in 21 and 22. And that's a combination of Chapter 90 funding, which we use every year. We get about $730,000 to $740,000 from the state. Of that, we use a portion to develop our TIP projects and design those TIP projects. So we really have about $500,000 a year in Chapter 90 money available for our road paving program. And then we've been lucky that over the last 6 years, we've got appropriated $3 million locally to pave roads. And that's been a tremendous help. But going forward, we have $500,000 has been appropriated for this coming year, and we'll be using that. That's why we're at the $1 million in fiscal year 2020. But going forward, we're currently on hold with that. It's just not sustainable to borrow money every year, and that's something we'll work towards. We'd love to have that funding restored or increased, but right now we're proposing our next 3-year plan at $1 million and then $500,000 and $500,000.
And the Mass Municipal Association that our select board all are members of, the MMA advocates for Chapter 90 increases every year, or at least a commitment of what those numbers will be over the next 3 years, because we don't find out what those numbers are until the spring pretty much, and you can't go out and get contractors and go out for bid if you don't have assurances that you have that money. So
That's correct.
it's a real scramble to get that work done, and that's why you see in all the towns all the construction that's happening all at the same time.
Yeah, and that's one of the other benefits of having that local approval. That allows us to get out of the gate early, and we've had some luck with that in April and May, starting our road work, where sometimes that Chapter 90 money hasn't been made available yet. So we've been able to hit the ground running, get our contractors scheduled, and get it out there. Whereas if you wait towards the end of the year, you're all using the same contractors, and it's really hard to schedule. And then you have weather issues, and it can really delay your program. So that's another added benefit. So this is the fiscal year 2020 to 2022 paving plan. It's not as impressive as the previous ones because we're at a lower funding level. We're proposing $2 million total. I'll show you each year. So this coming year, we're proposing to do some mill and overlay on Pine Street, preventative maintenance on Central Street, Eastman Street, Purchase Street, reclamation on High Street and Hill Street, and Pond Street, and then some routine maintenance with crack sealing on some other roads. So that's what $1 million looks like for this coming year. And then going forward into 21, we really can only touch preventative maintenance. We're proposing Day Street, Elm Street, Massapog, Sheridan, and Turnpike. So there's not a lot going on in this year, and even less in 22, because one of those roads that comes up for reclamation is Cranberry Lane. It actually has a higher level of traffic than most subdivision roads. It's a subdivision road, but it has about 1,200 vehicles a day. So that one does come up, and Highland Street for preventative maintenance. So again, not very impressive as far as the graphic on that. So the other thing that pavement management allows us to do is to really look at what the impacts are on your budget, and it'll spit out what you should be doing with a budget, but it'll also tell you what you should be spending to get to a certain goal. And we can look at that two different ways, using pavement management plan itself and then what's called a mile year analysis. So the pavement management deterioration curve, our program is good, but it's a pretty simple program. It doesn't really have a very complex deterioration curve, and it's limited on what you can put in for scenarios. But this is what our pavement management plan tells us, and it's been calibrated to basically reflect the real world conditions. Since we've been spending about $1 million a year, and our roads have stayed in an RSR of 74, I've kind of calibrated the model a little bit to show that at 74 and $1 million a year, it stays even. If you see the red and the orange, those are funding levels either at $0 or $500,000. Our level of service will go down. And then if you get into the blue and green, spending $1.5 million and $2 million, our RSR will go up. Now this is very simple, and it doesn't reflect inflation or anything else like that. And it also is based on what we've done. And what we've done is really those lower cost repairs on our good roads. So it's kind of skewed a little bit on the low end, because we really haven't got into that heavy lifting reclamation roads. We've only done limited roads like that. So this model, I believe, is undervaluing what we need for funding. The other analysis, which I prefer, is the mile year analysis, and this is developed by Federal Highway. It's a very simple approach. We have about 117 miles of public roads. Every year, those get a year older. So every year we lose 117 mile years of roadway life. So to counteract that, you should be adding a life extension of 117 miles per year. So different repairs will add different life extension to your roadway network. Like crack sealing gives you 2 miles, 2 years per mile. And a reclamation all the way down the bottom, that's going to give you a 20-year life extension. So plugging in what we did last year, we added 81 miles of life to the system, but we also lost 117 for a net loss of 35 miles per year. So pavement management says that's good to break even and stay equivalent, but using the mile year analysis, it shows that we're definitely underfunding. So looking at what we've spent over the last 5 years and what we need to spend, we can see that to really get to that 117 miles of life extension, we should be spending about $12,600 a year to get to per mile to get to our target. And that target is basically $1.5 million over the last 5 years is what we should be spending to keep our roads in the same condition they're in today. And looking at that graphically, you can see what we've actually spent, what we're proposing to spend, and then for the 5 years from 15 to 19, that 1.5 million mark, and then inflating that at the current costs of 4.5% is what our construction costs are escalating. Looking out to fiscal year '22, it doesn't look great. We're going to be at $1.7 million of need, and we're going to be funding $500,000. So that's a pretty big delta. So I don't want to be doom and gloom, but I just want to let you know that we're doing the right things. We're doing innovative techniques, and we're keeping our roads in good shape, but we're not fully funding where pavement management needs to be to maintain our roads. At some point, it will catch up with us. I'd be happy to take any questions you have, or...
Dave, just really quick on
Sure.
the subject of Chapter 90 funding, for the public's benefit. Chapter 90 funding is funding that cities and towns in Massachusetts receive from the state every year.
Correct.
Right? And that has been level funded, with the exception, I think, of 1 year it was increased, which I think was reflected in, we had a bump in funding.
Yes, you could see that funding's
That's right,
gone
in
up.
16. So the state's been funding Chapter 90 at a level of approximately $200 million statewide every year, with the exception of that 1 year where we had a $100 million boost, which was meaningful, as you could see its local impact here in Easton. I just want to point out, Dottie, you referenced the MMA. The Mass Municipal Association advocates for multi-year Chapter 90 authorization, so towns know what they can expect. Chapter 90 also looks at this closely every year because MMA looks at it closely every year because Chapter 90 is the main or sole source of funding for road improvements in many cities and towns in Massachusetts. And their accounting of the statewide need for Chapter 90 funding is closer to $685 million, not $200, which is more than 3 times the amount. So, which jives with, in Easton, our share is about $500,000 in available repairs. If that was funded at a more significant level, based on the MMA's research, that would be close to the $1.5 million.
Exactly. Yeah, and we do participate in that survey every year as well. But yeah, it's a problem, and that $200 million that's been funded statewide, which translates to about $730,000 to $740,000 per year in Easton, that's not adjusted for inflation. It's been flat for a very long time.
People should write to the governor and to their legislators saying that we would really want an increase in, I mean, not the way the state roads look like they're maintained. I'm sure that's kind of a long shot, but.
Yeah, I think we're all in a very similar situation, and the infrastructure needs are pretty significant throughout the state and here in Easton.
I just wanted to point out real quick, you guys have done a tremendous job with the ice management with the roads, with that new products you've been putting down. It's really noticeable when you go into some of these other towns as far as the icy roads versus Easton, so
Great, thank you.
nice job.
How does the 74 rating rank compared to some of our benchmark communities or surrounding communities?
So the RSR rating is a little different from what other communities use as a PCI, a pavement condition index. So it's tough to tell, but generally 74 is not horrible. But you'd probably want to be near that 80 range. If we were comfortable with our road network, we'd be in the 80s, and we'd feel a lot better about it. We have a lot of roads that we're not really getting to at this point, and so some start out at 70. We started out at, I think, 74 initially, so we've been able to hang in there. But 74 is not bad. It's just not where we want to be.
Right. I was surprised to find out recently that Easton actually has the largest amount of road miles, I believe, in our benchmark communities and our surrounding towns. So it's a lot of mileage to maintain. I am concerned that, while not a glamorous one, but our roadways are an asset to the town. And it seems like, kudos for keeping it 74 and flat for the years that we have, but certainly concerned as we look out 2 years where we begin to have a very important asset, one that we probably take a little bit for granted, begin to deteriorate even further. And if 80 is the target and we're going to be moving away from that, it doesn't feel comfortable nor something I would like to see happen. And I know that falls in so many different shoulders to try to figure out the solution for that, but I just think it's important not just for this particular asset, but all of the town assets, that we begin to find solves that help us get back to the place that we want to be or closer to it, rather than farther away.
Are we responsible, meaning Easton, are we responsible for all the roads, like some of the roads I think of maybe the state is responsible for, like 138 and maybe 123?
So the only sections that the state is responsible for is Route 138, top to bottom, and then Belmont Street is state. Everything else, so the state numbered routes 106 and 123, except for Belmont Street, is the town of Easton. So we're responsible for all those roads. We do have a small amount of private roads that have been accepted or or gone through the planning board process to remain private, and then a few that have never been accepted. But we can't get Chapter 90 money for those roads or spend it on those roads. But in general, most of the roads are ours.
I will say, as I looked at that map and we talked about the subdivisions that we just haven't touched historically, and nor are they on the agenda to touch, I wonder if there's some benefit as we think about this. I know it's not impacting a lot of people, but yet if we added up all those roads that we haven't been able to get to, I wonder what that impact looks like in terms of how many of those roads are past their 20-year life or 10-year life. And I know we do the emergency and we keep them safe, but boy, it seemed like an awful lot of roadways we just haven't even got a chance to get to.
Yeah, most of those roads in red are well past 20 and 30 years. So they're really in dire need. The biggest benefit to a pavement management system is it prioritizes your spending. Right. So a road that's in good shape, if you do not do a road that's in good shape, a repair that's recommended, it's going to cost you more later. Unfortunately, for those roads in red, that cost doesn't go up. Once you get to a certain point, that cost is just going to remain high, but it doesn't, there's no opportunity cost lost to not do it, but there is to not do a good road. Right. So that's why we're really stressing, our preventative maintenance on those good roads, and we're kind of forsaking those other roads at this point, just because we have to. Not doing that preventative maintenance means a bigger bill down the road. Exactly. That repair on that road gets more costly every year. It slips down a repair band until it ends up in that basement area that most of our subdivision roads are in now.
And Dave, one of the important factors I believe that goes into the calculation of which roads are getting paved is not just the fact that it's more efficient to maintain a good road versus totally redo one that's sort of falling apart, but one of the variables you consider is the amount of traffic on a road, right?
Correct. So, the average daily traffic.
As much as it's without a doubt frustrating on a subdivision road if it's riddled with potholes. If the town has limited funds to spend on these repairs, which we do, it makes good business sense to go for the roads that are most heavily traveled. Yeah, a road that's 20,000 ADT goes to the top of the list just because of that amount of traffic, and then a subdivision road that's a dead-end road has a 250 ADT. It's pretty obvious where that funding, all things being equal, should be spent. ADT is average daily traffic?
Average daily traffic, yeah.
Any other comments, questions? All right, we're going to go right into the Five Corners.
I think we did have another person join the room. I'm not sure if it is the Human Resources Board.
Are you Jennifer?
No. Okay, sorry. We'll wait till the end of this point.
Dave, that water bottle back, it's right near the edge.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So we're going to go into the Five Corners Sewer Phase 2 traffic plan.
Okay. I'm Jack Trottle with Woodard & Curran. I'll present the Five Corners Sewers Phase 2 project update. Our focus tonight is on traffic management. We're installing sewer primarily down Foundry Street, and that road is a little bit narrow, so it's going to be important how we manage traffic through that area.
It's on there. There we go. Oh. That's odd. Let's see if it. You got your slide, right?
Oh, yeah, I'll just go off this.
Yeah.
I'll start with a brief background. We'll cover some slides that you've seen in the past and just provide some updates on those. We'll give an updated project schedule on where we are and what's coming over the next year or two. We'll spend a fair amount of time on traffic. Greg Lucas from Beta will be speaking on how we'll manage traffic through the project area and how we'll try to minimize both the volume of traffic and the impacts to people. Then we'll come back to public outreach. We are committed to doing a fair amount of public outreach throughout the project, using all the tools that we have at hand to keep everybody aware of the status of the project and also stay in tune with betterments, et cetera. And then we'll talk about the next steps, where we're at, and what's coming up over the next few months as the project gets going.
There you go.
Perfect. So this map presents the total area for the Five Corners project. The area in blue, we're looking at sewering all of those individual properties. You see the long purple line that extends well into Mansfield. That was built under the Phase 1 portion of the project. Again, this is a slide that you've seen many times. In 2010, the sewer district was established. Around 2015, some capacity was acquired by the town of Easton for the Five Corners area. And then in 2016 and 2017, that Phase 1 force main was installed and completed. And that force main extends to Robert Drive to the Avalon area. So the focus of this construction is connecting to that force main and sewering all these individual properties. You see a dark blue line. That's a lot of the construction work for that gravity sewer pipe that we're installing. There is a pump station where there's currently a small DPW garage just west of Pequannock near the foundry site. And this area extends from Robert Drive to the east at around Five Corners, and extending off various streets such as South Street, Pequannock, Bay Road, north and south, Depot, and Foundry to the east. As far as a project schedule update, the dates in white are complete. They're behind us, and the dates in yellow we're moving forward through. The project is funded. There's a low-interest loan through the state, the SRF loan program, and we're looking to get their approval sometime later this month for the permission to advertise. And at that time, we'll put the project out to public bid, so in March, and then in April, we'll get the contractor on board. And once the contractor's on board, it'll be that May-June timeframe where we can start with construction. Construction will continue through the 2019 season, and then also start again in 2020, and then final paving will be sometime late 2020. Sewer connections will be able to occur sometime in the summer of 2020. So that's when the system will be live.
Next is beta.
We'll transition to Greg for some the details on the traffic plan.
Thank you, Jack. For the record, Greg Lucas from Beta Group. We're working with Woodard and Kern and with the town on evaluating the traffic impacts of this project and looking at some potential detour plans. And so the work on Foundry Street, which is a relatively narrow road, there's not enough room there to put in a gravity sewer and maintain traffic in both directions. And so from the beginning, we talked about needing to detour traffic in one direction on Foundry Street. And so it was determined that the westbound traffic would be maintained, but there would be an eastbound closure. And so this will allow the sewer to be constructed while westbound traffic still continues along Foundry Street between the Robert Drive intersection at Avalon and Highland Plaza and Five Corners intersection. And so to do this, traffic eastbound would be detoured along Highland Street. And so we're showing, we're looking at temporary signals at each end of Highland Street, at Foundry Street 123 on the west end, and at Bay Road on the east end, to accommodate traffic through those intersections which are presently unsignalized. And so traffic passing through the area, this is traffic on Route 106 eastbound. You can see the green arrows. That traffic, instead of continuing along Foundry Street between the two intersections, would turn right onto Foundry Street onto 123, westbound for a short segment, use Highland Street, follow Highland Street to Bay Road, turn left, and then come back to the Five Corners intersection where they could continue in any direction that they needed to go. Whether it was left to go back along that segment of Foundry Street if that was their destination, or north to Depot, or right to Foundry Street eastbound, Route 106 eastbound. Traffic coming out of Avalon or the Highland Plaza, similarly, wouldn't be able to turn left, would have to go straight across, and then turn left at Highland Street, continue along Highland Street, turn left at Bay Road, come back to Five Corners, continue on their journey. Route 123 eastbound traffic would be captured at Highland Street. There would be signage telling them that the road is closed ahead and they would need to use Highland Street, turn right onto Highland Street, and then continue, turn left onto Bay Road, continue to Five Corners. And finally, this is one of the more challenging parts, is that there's some businesses and some destinations along Foundry Street, especially closer to Five Corners. The challenge there, those people wouldn't be able to go back towards Five Corners. They would have to continue westbound along Foundry Street and then loop around from Highland Street back to Bay Road to come back to Five Corners.
Will that be all hours of the day, or will it be partial hours of the day? Like, will that open up again at night, or?
That'll be all hours of the day, because they'll be sequentially working along Foundry Street, digging a trench to install sewer. And so while local access will be allowed to people that have destinations along Foundry Street, in general, for the duration of this work, traffic will be detoured eastbound.
Do we have an estimate on how many less cars will travel along that section of 106 during this period of construction?
What do you mean by how many less?
So, for example, if there was equal access and no disincentive by people in the community to drive up and down the road, then they would drive right by a lot of those businesses you just referenced. But under this model, is there any understanding whether or not, just by the dint of the nature of construction and the fact that people will have to circle around, that there will be less traffic flow on 106 by those businesses?
Potentially. There were I'll get into that in a future slide. Kind of looking at traffic projections. I think that speaks to your question.
Thanks.
And so, to evaluate this, we collected data. We collected traffic volume data in September of last year. The average daily traffic, which you all know from Dave's previous presentation, along Foundry Street is 24,000 vehicles on a typical weekday, 21,000 vehicles on a Saturday. We also looked at the peak hour at those 4 key impacted intersections: Foundry Street at Robert Drive, the Highland Plaza, Foundry Street at Highland, Bay at Highland, and then Five Corners. And so we took those detour volumes and redistributed them along the detour route and analyzed that. The majority of traffic that uses this route is regional. There's a lot of people that are going through this area that aren't necessarily from Easton. They aren't necessarily, they're not coming from Easton or going through Easton, they're driving through Easton. And those are the people that, on a regional level, potentially will avoid the area during this construction. Typically, we estimate those things at somewhere on the magnitude of 20 to 30% of traffic. One thing that happens here is it's critical to have advance notice. Jack will talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. To have advance notice so that people are aware of what's going on. People know the impact of what's going to happen. They don't just come on day one and realize that they're being detoured along another route. They're aware of what's going on. They can plan their route. Also, while a detour route is more effective for someone who doesn't know where they're going. Someone who's following along, following Route 106, following Route 123, and now they have signs that tell them, oh, this road's closed, you need to go a different way. People who travel these routes every day know the roads, they know the network, they know where they're going, and they are more likely to seek an alternate route.
One of my concerns is the folks who live on that part of and how we're going to address, they're going to have to go west to Quonicket or in order to get around it. So they won't be able to come out of their driveways and go left and go to Five Corners. They'll have to go all the way around, right?
Right. There will be times during this where that local access will still be allowed. They'll still be able to come out and make that movement. Even though the through traffic won't be using it, as long as there's not a physical, something in their way, construction equipment, open trench, whatever it may be, even if the road is blocked off, they could still make that movement during certain periods. Again, it all has to do with the sequence of construction, but it's important to understand that it's not that the road is torn up from end to end for the whole duration of this. There will be times where local access is still allowed.
You mentioned there were 24,000 cars that came through on a given weekday, 21,000 on Saturday, and you referenced somewhere between 20 to 30% of that traffic. Is it of those numbers? So is it 25% of the 24,000, rough estimate?
It's 25% of essentially half of that, because 24,000 is both directions.
Is both, got it.
And so it works out, the reduced volume works out to about 800 vehicles in the morning, which is the most critical. The highest is 800 vehicles being detoured, and that's with that reduction in place during the morning peak hour.
So if it's 12,000
Anxious.
and it's 25% of that, wouldn't that be closer to 3,000?
That's over the whole day. I'm talking about just the peak hour, just
Understood.
the busiest hour.
Understood. But I'm just trying to capture how many less cars are going by these businesses on a daily basis, just to try to understand. Thank you.
David had a question?
I just have a quick question. Should any of the businesses along that, I would say, the eastbound lane that's going to be shut down, should any of those businesses anticipate having to close down for a day or two because you're working, say example like the Foundry, if you're working right at that point, is that
In general, the contract will be required to keep access to those businesses. Obviously, there will be points as they're working where they're directly in front of the driveway. The businesses will be notified ahead of time. So there may potentially be periods of time, potentially a day, where they can't access, where access isn't allowed to the business
That's something
or to the
we'll,
resident.
that's something we'll work out. This happened on the Queesit project.
Right,
We had to
right.
go in front of the Wendy's. They only had one access point. We coordinated with them to get a good time, did an early start, so they could actually be through that, have the trench plated so they can have access as soon as the lunchtime came around. So that's something we would work out with every business. We'd maintain access at all times and find out the best times to
Okay.
go in front of their property. Most have multiple points of entry, or at least it's wide enough where we could dig and then backfill and kind of hopscotch that way. But we would definitely work that out. We'll not take away access from anyone.
Okay, great.
Unless it's absolutely necessary, and we coordinate ahead of time.
All right, sounds good.
Excuse me. I just want to talk a little about the temporary traffic signals that will be at each end of Highland Street. And so these temporary traffic signals will use wood poles, like a typical wood utility pole, and have signal heads, traditional signal heads, hung from a wire that hangs across those poles. Foundry Street at Highland Street, we're slightly widening to accommodate a left turn lane because all of the eastbound 106 traffic would be coming down and need to turn left there to get onto Highland Street. And we would have an advanced phase for that, so there'd be a protected movement where northbound traffic stopped and that southbound left turn can be accommodated. There's also crosswalks, sidewalks, ramps there, and so pedestrian accommodation will be provided as part of the signal control under this temporary condition. Bay Road at Highland Street, the same type of wood pole signal heads hung on wires setup, but simpler operation because there's no sidewalks there, there's no pedestrian crosswalk. Simple two-phase operation, one for Bay Road, one for Highland Street. And both these signals will have detection so that it will be responsive to where the traffic demand is.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Where the water goes under I would say a bridge over where, would that be Old Pond? Is that New?
There's New Pond and Old Pond, both have culverts here.
Will that whole stretch have to get, how are you going to address that, basically, is probably a better question. Is that going to be rebuilt? I mean, or is the pipe's going to go over the road, or?
The pipe actually, the water line, the force main, and the sewer gravity main is going to be installed just off next to the bridge, next to the culvert. So it'll be, we've already permitted that. It's going to go through the actual stream bed. So it's going to be backfilled under the stream bed and concrete encased. So that we're not touching the superstructure of the culvert itself. Yeah, and then on the second culvert, we're directional drilling under that. So that we're going to drill with horizontal directional drilling, similar to what we did on Mechanic Street with the NEV project.
Okay, all right, great.
And so we looked at, assuming the detour traffic, what the operation of these two temporary signalized intersections would be. This is for Foundry Street and Highland Street. The existing intersections unsignalized. The operation today of that unsignalized intersection is for Highland Street eastbound and westbound. level of service F eastbound in all 3 peak periods, the morning, the afternoon, and the Saturday midday. Highland Street westbound, level of service E in the morning and Saturday, level of service F in the PM. Level of service is a relatively simple concept to understand. It's evaluated on an A through F scale, like a grading scale. And so that talks about the operation, the level of delay. Level of service F is failing. And so the expected intersection operations with the temporary signal with the detour traffic, we see Highland Street actually, because now it's signalized and people will have an interruption in traffic to get out, it's actually an improvement for people coming out of Highland Street at this intersection. The expected average queue, you can see there the level of service numbers, all grades all better than C, which is acceptable level of service or a favorable level of service. And then the average queue length, which I've expressed in cars. And so 2, 3, 4 cars expected to back up there during each signal cycle, and then they would clear. So generally favorable operations there with the temporary signal, with the detoured traffic. Bay Road at Highland Street is more challenging because there's a significant amount of traffic, all that needs to come out of Highland Street and turn left onto Bay Road. And so in the morning, which as I mentioned is the heaviest volume and the higher detoured volume, we see level service D, an average queue that may extend to 15 cars, which is approximately 350 feet. And then 4 cars in the afternoon, 7 on Saturday. And then on Bay Road, you see 9 in the morning northbound, and then 3 and 4 lower numbers.
For the simulation.
Yeah, and so this is a simulation. It's not elegant. This is a screenshot of a simulation program that we use. And this shows what we're looking at here, and hopefully you can see the small cars moving through here. This is at 4 times the speed. At 1 time the speed, it would be very slow to watch. But it gives you an idea of how the intersection operates, how the cars are interacting. You see them stop when the light's red, and then you see them, when the light turns green, you see them go. So you get a sense of what's happening here, what the operation will look like, how it will operate in real time with detoured traffic. You see a lot of traffic coming southbound, turning left, and a lot of traffic coming northbound and turning right. And those are the detoured volumes. 123 eastbound is a northbound vehicle turning right. 106 eastbound is the southbound vehicle turning left. And you see the typical traffic on Highland Street, which exists today, which would be accommodated by this signal.
Next one.
Yep. And so the next one, this is Bay Road at Highland Street. The street name is kind of cut off there. Highland Street is the long east-west corridor. And so you see here, we talked about those 15 cars. You see them there, kind of capturing all at once. You end up with a sort of rolling queue. There's a lot of traffic coming along this road because it's detoured. But the signal allows them an interruption in Bay Road so that traffic clears from Highland Street. And you'll see a handful of vehicles at each red interval stopping on Bay Road. So this generally just gives a picture of how this will operate. Yes?
Is there some sort of it's probably a better question for Connor. Is there some sort of a protocol on when you start diverting traffic down some of these residential roads? I mean, it's basically going to turn into a raceway. Is there going to be some sort of a higher police presence, to try to keep the speed under control along that stretch?
Part of this project is having police details out to help with both where the active work sites are, but I believe they're typically involved in traffic mitigation.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, people don't drive faster because of the detour. They're going to drive how they normally drive on Highland Street. So I don't anticipate any major issues with that, but we could definitely have police monitor that. That's quite easy to do. But generally, they're going to drive the character of the road. Highland Street is a certain character. It's fairly windy. And people are going to drive to that character, no matter if they're going down now without a detour or they're going with a detour.
Okay.
And those people who are following the detour route and aren't regular users of this street aren't as likely to go fast because they're not familiar with the road. They're trying to figure out where they're going, following the signage to make sure that they follow the detour to get back to 5 Corners and get back to the route they intended to be on.
Okay.
Any areas that became an issue, we would be able to dispatch police out there.
Okay. All right, sounds good.
So the other factor here is signal timing adjustments. Timing adjustments at the existing signalized intersection of Foundry Street, Eastman Street, and the Robert Drive, Highland Plaza, Avalon intersection. Timing and phasing adjustments at Five Corners. The phasing adjustment is to add a lead phase for that. Now we're directing a lot of traffic coming north into Five Corners. Want to give that more time and give them some protected time where nothing else is moving, so that they can get through that intersection, get to where they intend to go, whatever direction. This is going to require extensive observation and monitoring. Day one, week one, when it's first implemented, and over the course of time, because traffic, there's going to be a certain traffic profile when it first happens, and that's going to change over time. And it's going to be important to continue to work with the town to make sure that the signal can be responsive to that. If it requires timing adjustments, we can do that. Again, it's the opportunity to adjust and be responsive to operational concerns.
Do you anticipate further down Eastman Street going towards Mansfield that you're going to have signage that says you're coming to a shut road?
There's two aspects to this. One is static signage that will go up for the duration of the detour, telling people this road is closed, you need to turn, and it will direct them along the route. The other is using variable message signage to notify people ahead of time, definitely ahead of time before this is implemented, but also for the duration, so that they're aware as they come up, there's no mistaking that this road is detoured, is impacted, so that they're aware and can plan accordingly.
And something that was actually in paren on a previous slide that we talked over, but we partner with Waze for these projects, and we directly notify them ahead of time so that people using any sort of Waze or Google Maps type technology for planning their route, that'll already be programmed in. So those will be marked as work zones.
Yeah, we're a Waze partner. We can actually add that work zone in, so we'll detour people around that automatically.
Right.
Yeah, we've talked extensively with Dave and with Greg about getting every notification possible, every means necessary to let people know that this is happening, to make people understand what the impacts of it will be. Other construction impacts of the project, there's other streets that intersect with Foundry Street where there'll be sewer constructed. And so we're looking at, for the Pequannock Street, Pequannock Ave and South Street area north of Foundry, to use those as kind of one-way alternating pairs, so that traffic would be detoured onto South Street to get to Pequannock when that work needs to be done on Pequannock. And then the remaining streets can be done with short-term one-way alternating police details for South Street, south of Foundry Street, Depot Street, Foundry east of Five Corners, and Bay Road on both sides. And as we talked earlier about access to abutting properties, that'll be maintained. There will be a minimum 48-hour notice required, but it will be in the contractor's best interest, and the town will stress this throughout the duration, to work with these abutters, with business owners and residents.
That's it for me.
So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jack to pick up the rest of
Thank you.
the overall presentation.
And just for everyone to know, as soon as the presentation is done, I'm going to open it up to questions for the public. So I appreciate your patience, and then we'll do that again after the diff presentation.
As I said before, we'll be doing a fair amount of that public outreach continuously, a lot in the beginning of the project, but then periodically. We talked about a lot of these points, but I did want to stress, getting it out to Waze, getting it in people's GPS is going to help, detour some of the traffic. Doing the town crier updates, putting it on the website. You see a lot of information out there right now on the current project. I think that's working well. And getting the variable message boards, those are the bigger signs out there, well in advance of construction. Give people a heads up, a time frame, and they can start planning their routes accordingly. To the point on access to the properties, we will maintain access to the properties. I think that's a very important piece of the project. There could be a limited effort or limited time of managing access, but we'll have an inspector on site. He'll coordinate with the property owners. He'll give them several days in advance of, hey, we're coming up the street. What's your critical time? What do you need? Do you have anything going on? We'll work with them In our contract, we require certain signs to be put up by the contractor that the businesses are open, and we were editing some of that language last week on how to maximize that signage, right? Don't just put a sign that says it's open, let's show people how to get there. Sometimes we've had challenges for people just can't figure out what's the path, especially where we have one lane. And then the other thing that we've run into in the past is sometimes the police details aren't communicating things just right, and we're going to stress on this project to make sure that is communicated correctly, and that when a car does stop and asks them, can I get there? The answer is going to be yes, and this is how you do it. So there'll be a fair amount of police details coming, on and back, in and out of the project, and we'll make sure that we coordinate with them on a daily basis of when they come onto the project.
As far as the business impacts, it's much harder to get people to go down the road when it's completely closed. That's always a challenge. But the good part with this one is we will have traffic in one direction at all times. So people will be passing the businesses too, so it's not like they'll be forgotten about. So that's the one benefit of this type of configuration as opposed to a full closure.
And as I said earlier, with the schedule, we'll get that contractor on board over the next few months. Hopefully get a contract together in that April-May timeframe. Again, we put in the contract to have a workshop in May. The contractor will be there, get his schedule, get the sequence of construction, coordinate that, report out to the public, get input on timing and any concerns. But going back to some of the paving that was talked about earlier, pavement management, the sewer project includes the water main replacement and then paving the road at the end. So the work in the road is done, it's paved, it's clean. So that's a good way to do it. And we are sequencing some of that work as far as the sewer being in temporary water being put out there to all the properties on Foundry, the sewer being installed, and then the water. And that's primarily when that detour is going to be in place, and we're going to push hard with the contractor to get that work done this year. It may spill over into next year, or when they do paving, that might need to be set up. But definitely trying to minimize that time, push the contractor to have multiple crews, and just anything we can to minimize that disturbance. So.
Are we having any luck with trying to work with Columbia Gas to do the gas lines at the same time, or?
Yes, we've been in touch with them. I don't believe they have any work that needs to be done in this area, but they're aware of the project. We've been making them aware of all of our projects going forward.
Yep. And back to the schedule, construction, there'll be some work before then, but it'll be primarily June, July when you see a lot of excavation going on, the detour set up, and all of that will be in place. And then wrapping up construction in 2020, users can tie in, houses can be tied into the new sewer line, and then paving wrapped up in late 2020. So it'll be kind of the conclusion of the project.
So June and July, when will that go through? Like, will that stop in November and then resume again in?
Correct, yeah. It would be weather dependent, but typically November 15th is that cutoff date for work in the street as far as paving. But if the weather is good and we can maximize, take advantage of the season, we'll absolutely, we'll do that. But more than likely, yeah, it's typically mid-November it wraps up, and then early to mid-April is when they can get back out there.
Okay.
That's all we have. Can open it up to questions or discussion.
Any more questions from the board, or?
Just some observations. I think this is obviously a critical project for our town and our ability to create some economic development, so I understand the importance of it. But I am sensing that this is an additional burden that will be borne by a select group of people in our town. Not only the cost of the connection, but certainly the cost, whether it be economically, potentially to some businesses along the way. 3,000 less cars going by is meaningful, but again, appreciate the ability to keep that, even what we could keep there. I think residents, to the points that were made by Craig in terms of the safety and different traffic patterns and the potential impact to Highland. And I certainly say these things with much appreciation and respect for the thoughtfulness that went into this, I'm sure, and to give the lowest amount of impact to the community, but it is an additional impact. And I would just implore us and you, as you I'm sure have done, to continue to find ways to minimize that impact. And I don't know if, for example, it's signage for businesses as cars approach Bay Road to let people know that the businesses to the left heading west are open. I don't know if it is having a speed monitoring system on Highland, and I defer to those experts in the town that know their business well, but I would just implore all of us to think that way, to find ways to reduce the burden, either economic and or just the challenges of getting in and out of your driveway, which as we all know, it's already a busy stretch. So just appreciate it if you could keep that thought in mind and find ways to minimize the impact to our community at every step possible.
So if anyone from the public has any comments or questions, if you come up, please say your name and your address for the record and use the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Dale Carrister. I live on South Street, 21 South Street, which is one of the streets impacted. I, along with a number of the other folks here tonight, are part of a group that we call the Furnace Village Neighborhood Collaborative. At the moment, we have about 115, 120 members, including both residences and businesses who are immediately impacted. With the understanding that you have a number of constituencies in town and outside of the town in terms of regional traffic to deal with, I think it's safe to say our group is probably going to be the folks that Tom was just speaking of, who are most immediately impacted by this. I have a couple of questions, but principally what I'd like to find out is what can we do to open up a line of communication with the DPW and its consultants on the various issues that will be coming up. By way of example, you would mention that you're likely going to be working on certain contract requirements with respect to the bid packages that will be put out. And I would imagine from the folks who are here, the businesses, that if there's some way we can have some input in that, and by way of what the contractual requirements are to maintain access, by way of example, to the businesses and what the periods of interruption would be. Additional examples would be having some communication with respect to what the advance notice is. I understand you referenced the 48-hour advance notice, but I think for the folks who are in the area, you know, we'd appreciate having a longer term outlook on things and when things can be impacted so people can plan accordingly. And then in addition, I think we can also be of some benefit as the project is moving along in terms of giving some sort of real-time feedback from the folks who are most immediately impacted. So our goal is to work collaboratively with the town on these issues. We have two principal missions, one of which is to try to reduce the betterment cost that's going to be assessed to all of the folks, regardless of whether they hook up or not, and the second of which is dealing with the traffic issues. So my question is, what can we do to open up some communications with the town and its consultants to address these issues, so at the moment on the traffic issues going forward?
Yeah, I think that's great. Having a neighborhood group is spectacular, and we can communicate directly with you.
And would you be the contact person for that?
So if you can give me your contact information, I'd love to get it. We'll include you on, future notifications. As far as like look ahead, we generally have at least a week outlook, and usually we'll have some, neighborhood meetings. Once we have a contractor on board and we have some some preliminary schedules out there, we can give you a lot more than that. And this is what the intent is, and that's when we have that kickoff meeting. Once we do have that contractor on board, we intend to share more information. This is what the goal is from this location to this location. This is the time frame the contract is looking at, and then on a weekly basis, we usually do a look ahead. The contractor's planning on doing this amount of work next week, and we push that out on a Thursday or Friday. We definitely put it in our town crier on our website. We could even send it directly to your group.
Yeah, we have a system of email distribution to our group. In addition, we're planning on setting up a separate website to keep people apprised as to what's going on. So to the extent that we can be the recipients of information more than just on a 48-hour notice.
Yeah. It makes our job a lot easier, and we'd be very happy to work with you.
Right. And then, is there an opportunity to provide some input prior to the time that your bid packages are prepared for the contractors to solicit some feedback, and in particular from some of the business owners here, about what kind of contractual requirements, what might make sense from their perspective to make sure that there's appropriate signage and access? So we'd like to do that as well if we can.
Yeah, so the contractual requirements, we're actually putting it right in the contract that they have to provide signage. As far as what needs to get done, we'll make it happen. So there's an allowance for signage. It's in the contract that the contractor has to provide, and there's a bid amount for that. So that's going to be taken care of as far as the details of what actually is provided. We'll work with you on that throughout the project.
But as far as the actual preparation of the bids, in terms of what the requirements are for those contractors who are bidding, it sounds as if that process is going on now.
Yeah, and most of it is the contract's required to provide X amount of signage. So we have a number in there that will take care of that. What actually the details of what you as a group are looking for, we can work that out and work with you.
Can we work with you in terms of some, obviously it would just be suggestions,
Yep.
we understand that, but in terms of some things that particularly the business owners might find helpful
Yeah,
to work
definitely.
into your bid packages, because my experience with these kind of issues would be if it's not in the contract, it's less likely that it's actually going to happen.
Yeah, like I said, what's going in the bid package itself is, it's not going to be details of this sign on this location. It's a by square feet of signage and stuff like that. So we have that ability to have that contractor provide signage. And so we'll work with you on the details on what you want that signage to say. And it'll kind of be an evolving thing as the project moves forward. And we'll figure out what works and what doesn't, and where we need additional signage. So that's something that's really kind of a fluid situation that we'd work with you during the project. But we're more than happy to have any suggestions you have. We'll be happy to talk to you about it. I'll get your contact information.
Yeah, I think we'd like to have an opportunity at least to pass along some suggestions as you're finalizing your bid package, because again, perhaps some more specifics might actually ameliorate some of these issues as we move further down the road. So, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Dale, and thank you for forming that committee. I think it's very helpful to have a neighborhood group like that to get the information out to everyone. We're doing the best we can to get it out, and that just will make it even better for everyone. So thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Tom Callahan. I'm from 31 Lamplighter Lane. I'm involved with Dale and some of these other folks. Given the fact, Dottie, we have 3 condos in the footprint, the SBU footprint, and we're hoping to get some help and guidance with all the engineers and smart contractors around for tying in to existing septic where we wouldn't have to go into, for example, all 40 units in Lamplighter, where we would just continue to put our stuff out there, and we have one line coming off property and out. And we were hoping, we don't have to go and do this all by ourselves if we have experts present. And it's not just Lamplighter, but it's Gaslight, it's Greenwood, and I believe we're like the majority. It's like 60% of the SBUs. So
yeah, we'd be more than happy to work with you on that. It still would be the connection part would still be on the condo association, but there's definitely a way to
Right.
go from a common point.
yeah, we'd
and go from- I don't
pay
anticipate.
from the septic to the street, maybe have to get a pump.
I don't think you would need to do much more than that common area but we can definitely work with you on that.
Excellent.
And your chosen engineer on that.
Excellent. We can't use wood, wooden, current, that's a conflict.
You could, but thank you.
And do you need contact information, David, or?
Yeah, I'm going to give them my contact information. They can reach right out to me.
Okay, great. Neil?
Just have a few comments.
Can you just say your name and address for the record?
Neil Levine, 503 Foundry Street, 520 Foundry Street, 518 Foundry Street, 530 Foundry Street. Excellent traffic plan. Kudos to you for coming up with a solution that seems to be insurmountable as far as the traffic goes. Just a comment, I think the consultant's estimate of 30% is pretty accurate based on my past experience with the last construction project we had going down 106. We saw about a 30% drop in net sales during that last project on something that was much smaller. A question about the one-way traffic, is that going to be for the entire duration of the project, or when the work ceases in the wintertime, will two-way traffic open back up again?
Yeah, so it's intended while we need that detour in place. So as soon as that section is done, we'll restore, two-way traffic. And again, as soon as we can get it back in, we will. It may get paused for a little bit, depending on the progress of the contractor over the winter, and then it may restart again in the spring, but that's something we'll work with. It's going to be a fluid situation, but our goal is to have as least impact as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. So, oh, come on up.
Denise Higgins, 4 New Pond Way. Will that section of South Street continue to be closed down? This section that is over the bridge area?
Sure, that's a great segue for an update. The South Street culvert was originally planned to be under construction now and completed. Unfortunately, we needed a gas line moved, and because of the Merrimack Valley issues, that's been pushed off. So the contractor is currently looking to start up this winter and finish that project. So we anticipate that that will be done before construction begins on the sewer project. So South Street should be open again in a matter of months.
Would that, or could that be an access way for some of the local residents?
Yes, for local it would be, but it wouldn't be something we would sign for a detour. So local residents could use it, but we would not have that available for the detour because we wouldn't want people going down South Street to try to get through there because that would gum up the works again. But yes, it's anticipated that will be open for local traffic.
Okay. And I'm not sure if you said this or not, but if you could reiterate, will there be a portion of time where you anticipate that Foundry Street will be closed entirely for no traffic?
No, it's always our goal to have one-way traffic.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask one more shout out if Jennifer Campanella is here. Right, while we wait for Stephanie to come up, I'm just going to do that portion, go back to that real quick.
Certainly.
So we have an appointment for the Human Resources Board. We had one application, and that's Jennifer Campanella. She is an attorney and a senior managing director and chief counsel, and private markets at John Hancock. She has a broad legal and management background, a law degree, a business degree with a major in accounting. She deals with employment and compensation-related matters on a regular basis.
Excuse me, Dottie. I'm so sorry to drop. If anybody's here because of the sewer district, they may want to stay for the DIF presentation that pertains to it. It's a very important piece that may impact your thoughts.
Oh,
and I
thank you for
apologize,
catching that. No.
Madam, for interrupting.
And she has deep experience in negotiating and managing conflicts. So we only had one applicant for this position. And if anyone has any comments or questions, if not, we'll take a vote.
I was very impressed with the application. I would have liked to talk to her, but I'm very impressed with it.
Based on the experience, I think Jennifer will add a tremendous amount.
Excellent. So this is a roll call vote. If I could have a motion, a second, and a roll call.
So moved.
Second?
Jennifer, what is your last name?
Campanella.
I read it, but I forgot her last name. King Campanella?
Broussard Campanella.
Barger Campanella?
Full Genetti Campanella.
Mills Campanella.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we're going to do the same thing with this presentation for the DIF. The board will ask questions, and then we'll open it up to the public for questions and comments.
Good evening. I'm Stephanie Danielson, the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the town of Easton. With me this evening is Victoria Storrs from Camoin Associates. Camoin has been working with the town over the past several months to help the town in establishing a district improvement financing program for the Five Corners District. The reason we're here tonight is to present the board with a draft of the master plan for the District Improvement Financing Program. We're going to do a full presentation of that plan. One thing I do want to note, I was practicing and talking to my husband and going through the presentation, and he said, "What is a DIF?" You will hear us refer to the DIF. It is District Improvement Financing. So it's sometimes a little easier just to say that. Before I turn this over to Victoria, what I want to do is review what a DIF is and why Easton is exploring this as a financing tool. Okay. So DIF is a financing tool that's authorized under Mass General Law, and it allows a community to set aside revenue resulting from new growth in a defined district to help offset the cost of capital investments that the community is making to help trigger economic growth and development within that district. So, for example, the Five Corners district is going to be undergoing the sewer project, and you heard a lot about the traffic management plan for that. And the establishing a DIF district would allow the community to define that sewer district as a DIF district and to project out what the anticipated revenue is from new growth that will result as the opportunity for wastewater comes into existence for the communities. This is something that has long been identified by the town as a need. The Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan, as well as the Envision Easton Master Plan, identified the constraints for development in the district, and things like restaurants are inhibited because of the lack of the public sewer. So just installing the sewer alone, the sewer collection system, will trigger some new growth in that area. If the town does, so again, the town can use the DIF district, the revenues that are generated from that new growth to help offset some of the costs associated with the sewer project. In addition, the town can use that money for other projects. One of the things establishing the district does as well is communicate broadly that the town is investing in that district and expects to see new growth and development. That in turn should attract private development that will actually result in the type of development that we'd like to see there. One of the things a DIF is it's not a new tax or a special assessment on top of the existing property tax. Again, what you're doing is setting aside a portion of the new growth revenues to pay for the cost of infrastructure that is sparking growth that wouldn't have occurred otherwise without that investment that's being made. Easton's exploring this opportunity for the Five Corners, first and foremost, to help offset the sewer costs that are expected for the construction of the sewer, and to help ease some of the pressure on the betterment fees. Potentially, if the revenue that we've conservatively projected will occur as a result of the sewer being available exceeds expectations, the DIF money could also be used for other infrastructure projects. As part of the process of determining whether a DIF would be feasible for the town to pursue, we conducted a visioning session back in September with residents and business owners in the Five Corners district. And asked them what their vision was for that district and what they thought a vibrant community would look like. And overwhelmingly, they said they felt that a mixed-use neighborhood where you offered residential, people could live, there were businesses that they could walk to, there were recreation opportunities, there were connections to the open space that exists in the district would be important to them. They felt that that would really define the area and make it a place that was desirable and would spark additional economic growth. In order to do that over time, we'd need other infrastructure improvements like sidewalks, streetscape improvements, some traffic management controls along the roadway. If, again, the projected revenues exceed what we've conservatively projected out, those additional funds that are going into the DIF could be used to cover those costs. In order for those costs to be able to be covered, you have to include those projects in your master plan in the program. It does not bind the community to actually undertake those projects. That is a decision that would be made down the road, but you want to include them so you have that option. If you don't include them, you cannot use those DIF funds for those type of projects.
Who decides on how much of that money is used for what aspect?
So part of the financing plan that we're reviewing in draft form tonight sets a percentage-based target of assumed future new growth in the district that would go into a segregated DIF fund, which I believe we're going to look at in more detail later in this presentation. But that's part of a decision that is made at this level and then brought to town meeting for adoption in May, is what percentage of that projected revenue do we want to set aside for the district improvement financing program. And from there, those funds would be eligible for use for projects contained within that program. As Stephanie just alluded to, the primary inspiration for the town pursuing a DIF program was to try to relieve some of the cost of betterments for the folks in this area. We know it's substantial. However, as we try to be with any kind of financial projection, we are making a lot of conservative assumptions of growth in this area. For instance, not including any kind of annual escalation for market valuation, which, save for major recessions, typically you would do. So the idea is first and foremost to use some of that money to help reduce the betterment. Anything above that at that point would be in its own fund that you, the community, would appropriate through a normal appropriations process for these projects. So none of it doesn't get put in this kind of off-books account that I get to just kind of have fun with when no one's looking. It gets put into a specific account that would be accounted for by our finance department. And any use, most likely borrowing for the scale of these projects, would have to go through the standard town meeting process.
Okay.
So if I could, so this DIF needs to be voted and approved at a town meeting.
That's correct.
Right, so we have to go to town meeting, we have to get the town to show up and vote to approve the DIF. And if they do that, then we'll have a certain amount of funds that become available that I'm sure we'll get to, but would lower the betterments that people may be paying in this area. Is that
Yeah, that's
succinct?
That's the plan.
Got
yes.
it. So just want to make sure we make that direct connection that it requires the town to approve the DIF.
Right.
Then we have the option.
That's right. This is not an administrative project that
Right.
I or even the selectmen can do. This requires town meeting to vote to adopt this district because it has broader implications for the town as well.
Understood.
One quick question. So it's going to go to town meeting. I know you're kind of ironing out the kinks of it all, but is it going to be well-defined? And I'm sure the people that live in that district want to know, we're going to definitely get some money to help out with the betterment. So is it going to be, when we go to town meeting, is it going to be pretty well-defined on, what percentage of this is going to go here, percentage of this is going to go to there, so that they can kind of gauge how much, or is it discretionary and we'll see what happens and we'll see how much money we got? Or can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So the projections, and I was going to talk a little bit about that. One of the first steps in determining whether you're going to establish this program, it was to do a feasibility assessment, to really look at what your what the likely growth would be in the district if you did nothing. If you did not construct the sewer project, what could you expect for new development? And as we know, it would be very limited. Then very conservatively looking out, based only on the construction of the sewer. So none of those other projects I referenced were incorporated into that projection. What Camoin did was, and based on the visioning session we had, kind of the input there, doing some market analysis. So again, realistically, what could you expect for business growth in that district, any type of employment opportunities, residential opportunities, as a result of the construction of the sewer. They very conservatively projected that new growth over a 30-year period could be around $14 million. And again, as Connor pointed out, there were no other inflation factors. It was a very conservative approach. The intent is to only set aside 50% of that new growth into the DIF. So you'd still have, you'd still have the value of the underlying value of the properties would still generate revenue that would go to the general fund. And then 50% of that new growth would still go into the general fund. So only 50% of the new growth would go into your DIF. And again, it was a very conservative approach so that the town could really have a better level of comfort that you'd be generating enough to contribute to offset those sewer costs.
Has there been any more talk or any sort of predictions on, we're talking about quite a bit of residential the growth is basically we're looking at residential. The impact of the school system as far as the quantity of the amount of kids that could be produced. I just have a lot of concerns about taking 50% of new growth and basically stripping out half of the new growth that should be going towards other functions of government, whether it's the school system or, guys, we're already kind of struggling with the revenue as it is. I get a little concerned about where's the money going to come from? Are we going to have more problems down the road on the other side of it because we're taking 50% of the revenue? I think that's basically where I'm.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's entirely valid. Any dollar of new growth that you do not just put directly in the general fund is a dollar that's not available in the general fund for appropriation. So that's kind of a value question and a policy question. However, I think that something that's important in this context is that we're looking at DIF in the context of this project, that if this project did not advance, none of this growth we're talking about would be happening at all. So one way to look at it would be, yes, 50% of that growth is being set aside to help effectively reinvest in this project and reinvest in this area. However, if that project doesn't move forward at all, then 100% of the growth does not happen. So that's one way to look at it. Another concern regarding residential development, some folks are concerned when you have residential development, the impact on the schools. What we've seen through the MSBA process is that despite, in the past decade, Easton's housing stock has diversified. We have largely met Chapter 40B's requirement of having close to that 10% subsidized housing inventory. We have not, in reality, seen the addition of more rental units or of different types of housing have a noticeable impact on school-age enrollment, because school-age enrollment has actually been largely flat. Despite the development of housing in Easton over the past decade, our enrollment, and these numbers are publicly available from DESE, which is the Department of Secondary Education, I believe, our enrollment has been largely flat. And if your enrollment is declining, that actually makes you less positioned to receive things like MSBA reimbursements on large projects like what we're looking at. So it's challenging. They're legitimate concerns, and it's a balancing act. But I do think that there's a lot of merit in looking at this.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of getting some sort of a fund so we can finance some of these projects and whatnot. I just get concerned about some of the budget struggles in general.
For sure, it is challenging, and I'll hopefully not put you all to sleep with that later.
For real numbers, we're down 200 students in enrollment, even with accounting for all the new housing that we have. So,
I know, but it's kind of, it's conflicting with the whole concept of smaller classroom sizes. I struggle with the whole thing. It is what it is. I know there's funding attached to more kids, but things seems like we're just making the bubble bigger, that's all, so.
I think it's a good point. I think we have to balance that responsibility for the potential expenses coming down the road that this development might cause, but offset that with helping people that are incurring betterments to actually enable this project to go forward. It's a heck of a balance.
Well, I don't disagree with you, as long as they're actually going to get the help. That's what my concern is, so.
Yeah, I think without the diff, there won't be any, but I think with the diff, we have the chance.
Right, and an important piece there is that that money goes into a segregated account that has specified uses, so it can't,
Right.
it would be reinvested. So I'm sorry, we've gotten off track.
No,
Yes,
I think
apologize.
but that's a really good point, Connor, that again, and that's why I wanted to make it clear that if you didn't include projects, even though, again, the primary purpose of setting up the diff at this point in time is to offset the sewer costs, and that will be the direction. If you don't include those other projects, you can't pay for it. So any projects that aren't, or anything that comes up like that, you can't pay for with the diff funds unless it's been identified in the program and it's been approved.
And on the flip side, just because it's in the diff program does not necessitate that it is paid for that way.
Right.
Say if we're in a future scenario where we have recurring revenue that is able to adequately fund capital needs, we would not need to necessarily dip into diff funds for a sidewalk project. You could do that through your general borrowing capital process.
Right. So I just wanted, again, to review kind of the steps we've gone through so far to get to this point. The first was doing the feasibility assessment. The results and recommendation to move forward were presented to the Board of Selectmen back in November. So that meant we needed to continue and work on developing the master plan, which is why Victoria is here with us tonight. The district has already been defined. After tonight's meeting, we are going to schedule 2 more public input meetings, again, to make sure that the residents of Easton have an opportunity to hear more about the DIF program and what's involved in the master plan and provide some comment. We're going to be working with the Neighborhood Collaborative to try to schedule some of those, so we'll be reaching out to Dale to help with that. And then, as was mentioned, once we finalize the master plan, you need to go to town meeting. So this will be an article that is submitted for the warrant, and then we go to town meeting for a vote. If it is affirmed and passes, then we move to the implementation phase and then the monitoring phase. So at this point, if there are no immediate questions, I'd like to turn it over to Victoria. And as I mentioned, she's going to walk through the components of the master plan.
Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Victoria Storrs. I'm with Camoin Associates. My colleague Jessica Albrecht is here this evening as well. Thank you for having us back. Camoin Associates is an economic development consulting firm. We implemented the DIF feasibility, the market analysis. This was a very well-constructed 2-part project on behalf of the town of Easton. You came to us first to ask if this goes in, what will come to the town? And that's the feasibility study. You've published it on the web. As Stephanie mentioned, as part of that, we did work with you facilitating the visioning session about what you want to see. And demographic information, your point about the schools, what growth could come, all of these things went into the market analysis. And our conclusion and recommendation at the end of that, as you know, was that district improvement financing would in fact be a valuable tool for the town of Easton to have for the goals that you have, and specifically to offset the costs of the betterment. And having been here facilitating and toured the town, it's wonderful to see some familiar faces all around the room. Thank you so much for continuing to engage on this project.
Do you want to control it, or do you?
I'll control it. Thank you. Tonight, I'll touch again on the DIF basics. Stephanie's been through them. The questions are very much on point already. Thank you very much. But I want to touch on the basics. think about it as an economic development tool that you use along with other economic development tools, other financing tools. And then we'll talk about what is in the proposed draft master plan that you have. And we'll be happy to answer questions, and we can return to slides as well. So I will start with the big question that I get asked. We're working with this tool with 3 other communities in Massachusetts right now, and everybody wants to know, well, why this? Why don't we just issue general obligation bonds? And the best answer is it's not either or. You can, as the town of Easton is contemplating, use them together. So district improvement financing is supporting something that you know and understand and brings additional benefits into a capital financing plan that you already have. For example, as Stephanie said, it can be a very powerful communication tool about where you want development. In this case, the Five Corners district. It signals seriousness. You're making a public investment to attract and support private investment. And everybody wants private investment. Everybody wants private dollars. They want businesses. They want jobs. When you make that public investment, in this case in the sewer, you're saying, and we really mean it, and we really are looking for ways to make that happen for you in a way that's going to help our community. Here in Easton, it's particularly important to find a tool to offset the costs of the necessary infrastructure. But you also have in front of you in the DIF Master Plan another tool. It is a written plan to understand, to share with the public, and to follow as you go forward. And it gives you metrics and performance so you can see, well, is this working as we expected? And some communities will take advantage of provisions written into the statute that gives them some more flexibility about how they handle their debt. So we like to say at Comoin Associates that it plays well with others. We have communities who are using it with debt. We have a community that has a MassWorks grant that they are working on the same project with, and MassWorks in this case actually saw the DIF as an indication of seriousness and local share. So any tools that you have that you would be using, you can use with this program.
And I do just want to add, before you go to the next slide, that we will continue to look for opportunities like applying for MassWorks grants to help offset the cost as well.
Has this been in any other communities that we could take a look at to see how it works? Or?
The biggest one so far in Massachusetts is the city of Somerville. They have done 2. I lived there a long time ago and there wasn't all that much, and now they have Assembly Square and Union Square, and it's actually facilitating a lot of transit-oriented development because of the T stations that are coming in over time. Taunton
and Brockton as well. Quincy has been using DIF for 12 years to help finance some of their projects. You may say, gee, those all sound like cities. They are. Mass Development has recognized that this really is a tool that can be used by smaller communities, and they've actually contracted with Comoin Associates to help develop templates and a package that makes it easier for communities like Easton to move forward. I think through our feasibility process and assessment, we really helped identify that this can work for smaller communities.
Yep. Nantucket, Longmeadow, and East Longmeadow did a cooperative DIF around contiguous parcels that they wanted to redevelop. Wednesday night, I'll be in the town of Plymouth. So the question you didn't ask, this statute enabling this kind of financing has been available in Massachusetts for a long time. There were certain complexities that made communities shy away from it, and over a couple of periods of legislation, the state did amend the statute, what we call the DIF statute, to make it easier for communities to implement it. And so we are now seeing more people interested in, well, okay, this looks a little more straightforward, let's take a look now. So there's some older ones and then more newer ones coming online. And as part of what we're doing for mass development, we have some case studies that they're going to be posting so that people can understand even more about what's been going on. Okay. Since DIF is enabled by a statute, Massachusetts General Laws 40Q, as it happens, there are specific components that a community puts together in order to create the development program, what we have called for you the master plan. Those are stipulated by the statute. You have to establish the boundaries and the parcels that are going to be affected in the district. You have to have descriptions of the improvements, the project costs, the time frame that the district and the development program are actually going to be in place. You have up to 30 years, a little bit of flexibility when you start the clock. An operation and management plan, which includes things like, well, who is going to oversee making sure the revenues go into the account where they belong? Who is going to be making any decisions that need to be made over time? And at the heart of it is a financial plan. The estimated increase in assessed values because of the new growth, the anticipated revenue from that incremental growth, what is an estimate of the tax revenues that you would expect to be generated, how much are you going to capture, just as the questions earlier were. Are you going to take 50%? You can take up to 100%. You can take 50%. I'm working with a community that has a very specific capital schedule, and we wrote a formula for them that said, well, you are going to take X of your costs every year. So there's some flexibility about how each community can choose. And you have to include a capital plan. Are you going to do bonds? Are you going to pay project costs directly? Are you going to have grants? And you don't need to know all of that up front, but for Easton, you know a lot of it, and that is in the plan. So those are the basic components, similar to any other kind of construction or major improvement plan that you would be putting together. It's a lot of the same questions.
And if a DIF is approved, that, like you said, shows we mean business, we're open for business, and that really gives you a leg up on being accepted into some of those other grants like MassWorks.
DIF is enacted with local legislation, and I think Stephanie covered that very well. That was actually one of the sticking points with prior versions of the statute. At one point, you did need state approval, and you don't now. It is definitely up to the town of Easton. Ongoing management is up to the town of Easton. You don't even have to file a report with the state treasurer, but you are responsible for managing it yourself using all of your usual processes. And working with Stephanie, with Connor, with Wendy Nightingale, and Robert Alford, this plan has come together with a lot of resources from the town of Easton, and it's come together very smoothly and very well. It looks like there are a lot of components. We've had terrific response and help from the town, and this document really does reflect what we have learned that you believe in, what you want going forward. So this slide has a little more specifics about what is in the document in front of you. In the DIF district, the development district is where you are going to implement your projects, and that's outlined as the sewer district. That's where the sewer is going to be built. Should there be the excess revenues, that's where you could then choose to do sidewalks or streetscape or roadway within that specific area, that targeted area. The statute says, well, you also need to be very specific about where your incremental revenue is going to come from. The statute calls that an invested revenue district. This is all explained in the document. For the town of Easton, they're the same. You're going to be gathering incremental tax revenues from the same place where you're going to be doing your projects. So you've got the same boundaries, and it simplifies things. That's your where, and that's established in the document. The development plan is the what. What are you going to implement? That's in there. That's your project costs, your estimates. because you had to have an invested revenue district under the statute also says, well, your detailed financial plan, you're going to call your invested revenue district development program. And that's a mouthful. In reality, it's your financial plan. And as you go through the document, you can think of it that way. This is the financial plan. In addition to the financial plan, you lay out your operation and management. Who's going to be responsible on an ongoing basis? In this draft master plan, we take it a little bit beyond the minimum statutory requirements, and there's a reason that we do it, and we can see people from the public are here because they are interested. We've worked with the town to create a document that meets all of the statutory requirements, but also takes a little more time to talk about the benefits to the community, the impetus behind it, why you want to use this tool, why you want to develop, and of course they can read the feasibility study. But we've included some of the rationale and the reasons. There's an inclusion of the legislative steps to adopt such a program. Tonight's meeting will be on there. It's in there in draft form. And some of the required assessor certifications. So the document is really comprehensive. Everything that you need is in there, either formally or, in the case of things that haven't yet occurred, in draft form. I'm going to pause here for a minute, and I want to underscore a couple of things that are very important about DIF as a tool. And it is a tool. As Stephanie said, it doesn't commit you to implementing the projects. It doesn't commit you to funding them in a specific way. You will undertake your ordinary town processes for expenditures and spending, even if the money is coming from one of these accounts. So it's creating a tool that you can use. It does not increase anyone's taxes. In fact, a parcel in a DIF district, the tax bill isn't going to look any different. It's not a special assessment. It is not a rate increase. No business or resident pays more because their parcel is in a DIF district versus in another section of the town. So let's return to the question that came up a little bit earlier, which is the capture and the use of DIF revenues. The two boxes to the right, we call baseline. That's what's happening right now. Tax revenues from the area in the Five Corners district are flowing into the town's general fund for your general municipal purposes. Tax revenues on the assessed value as of now will continue to flow into the general fund for all of the purposes that you are using them for. With the establishment of a DIF, that's the triangle of boxes to the left.
And I think you have your left and right mixed up. So the baseline was on the left, and the additional tax revenue, the triangle of boxes are on the right.
Yes, thank you. But the straight line and the triangle, and then we'll all be on the same page. Remember, we talked about the new growth. That's the incremental increase in value as a result of new private investment. Somebody expands their business. They invest $10 million. It increases the assessed value by $5 million. Tax revenues on that $5 million may be captured. We call those DIF revenues to differentiate them from other tax revenues. That parcel is still generating money into your general fund. The town is proposing to capture 50% of the additional incremental revenues, or potential DIF revenues. And so that's why the triangle has two boxes. 50% of the potential revenues are captured, deposited in funds to offset the sewer costs. 50% are deposited to the general fund.
So Victoria, before you move on, if I could, just to simplify it with an example in my mind. On the left side, so right now, let's assume we collect $10,000 of baseline tax. We're still going to keep that $10,000.
Yes.
But we generate, by doing this sewer, $4,000 more growth. So we keep the 10 that goes into the general fund, and of the $4,000 new growth, $2,000 in this example would go to offset sewer costs, and $2,000 would go to the general fund.
Yes.
Is that a simple way to say? So we don't really touch the existing tax revenues we're collecting. That $10,000 in that example would flow through. But then of the new growth, $2,000 goes to sewer costs to reduce betterments, in that example perhaps, and $2,000 would go into the general fund.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Quick question. So, as a rounded off number, everyone's going to say they have an abatement of $30,000. How does that work? So everybody is going to get their abatement for $30,000. So
Betterment?
I'm sorry, betterment for $30,000.
Yeah, they might like abatement.
I'm getting at the abatement. I'm getting there. Oh, I had it in my mind.
He'll be here after the meeting.
So they're automatically, they obviously have to pay the betterment of the $30,000 because there's no new growth yet. So how would that come, what form would that come in down the road? Would their taxes go down, or would they get, how does that work?
So that's a good question regarding the timing of financing. Before I give a general answer, is that in your next slides, or?
No,
Okay.
no.
So once, we actually have time as an advantage in this case. I know from a traffic perspective, I'm sorry, that will not feel like it's anyone's advantage, but this will be a 2 construction season project. Betterments cannot be voted by the selectmen until the project is done and all costs are accounted for. So that will not be until the end of construction next summer in 2020. So between now and then, we'll adopt this plan in hopefully May of 2019, and that gives us runway to work with calculating what is a safe and conservative estimate of borrowing we would do through DIF to support the total project cost for the Five Corner Sewer. And from there, we did a presentation back in October. We had the term amount to be bettered. So the total project cost for this, we have the borrowing that was authorized in 2015 for capacity purchase in Mansfield. We have the first phase that was built and paid for. The second phase, which is what we're all talking about, that's a big part of it. The total project cost is over $24 million. The amount to be bettered is over 16. If we were to say, look at the reasonably anticipated DIF revenue and say, okay, that's $7 million, we need to back out from that number and say, well, less any kind of administrative costs, interest on borrowing, things of that nature, how much could we borrow through that and put that towards this project? And then what does that do to, how much does that drop that number to be bettered? And from there, it's just dividing it out by the number of betterments. So we need to do that before the board votes a final betterment. The plan is not to have the board vote a final betterment in the end of 2020 and then later go back and look at it and say, okay, we're going to reduce betterments, because you actually can't. You would need to go through an abatement process. Sorry, no 30,000 abatement, Mr. Levine, yet. But so the plan would be that the number that the board votes at the end of next summer for the final betterments to be already taking into consideration the borrow that you would do through this program to support it, and have that betterment being lower when it is voted than what we're projecting right now. And sorry if that was a mess, because it's very kind of complicated, but so that's the plan.
So Connor, in that example, if it was $16 million to be bettered, and I think the amount was estimated, was it $7 million?
Approximately.
Approximately, and using round numbers, and it could be less than 7, but if it was $5 million, so the 5 would be deducted from the $16 million in that example.
Not necessarily, because the total project cost, it's not just the grants we've received and then betterments. The current financing of this project is already assuming some general obligation borrowing, and we'll talk about that tonight, and we have talked about that because a portion of this project, so we bought a certain number of gallons of treatment from Mansfield years ago. When this project is built out, not every single gallon will be allocated. So we would not better the benefit of gallons not being allocated, if that makes sense. So the town is holding on to some of that gallonage capacity to sell off for economic development. That's the impetus of this project, one of them. So the town is also holding on to some of the debt to pay for that capacity in the interim period until we sell it, because it would not necessarily be equitable for us to assess a betterment for all gallons we purchased, when in reality we're only actually giving out 80% of those gallons. So there is a portion of that cost, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Okay.
There is a portion of the total project cost today, as was shown back in October, that is called just town reserve. This is similar to the model that was used in Queesit, where in Queesit's case, half of that gallonage approximately is not built into the public project and is to be bettered later, privileged later. So it's not a one-to-one, this is the amount to be bettered. Any diff revenue automatically is just a clean subtraction. Some of that might go to the reserve, but the intent is for the majority, the helpful piece, to go to the diff, the betterment amount, the amount to be bettered. But I would caution a one-to-one projection at this time, because one of the things we need to do between now and town meeting is refine the sewer finance plan. And there's a lot of things up in the air about that. One is we're going to put the project out to bid and then get an actual bid price, because right now we have a $13.5 million estimate. So once we get that exact cost, that will pull down the total project cost and the amount to be bettered. And we need to look at how much of that how much should the town reserve be based on the capacity we're holding on to, and how much of the diff is going towards it.
So I guess I want to try to make a general statement, if I could, and I appreciate all that backdrop.
Sure.
It sounds like we've identified 16 million as a potential number right now, and that this is a $1 million opportunity to lower that.
It's more than $1 million.
And I'll keep it simple, because I don't want to.
Yes, it is a meaningful opportunity.
This is a meaningful $1 million plus multi-million dollar, and I'll let you stop me when, but opportunity to lower the fundamental betterment costs that are going to be assessed. And to Dave's point, it might be helpful at some point, not to speak for you, but with you, if the current estimate is $30,000 and we believe we can cut the cost of the project by whatever factor,
what does that
then we
mean?
can help people understand the magnitude of the opportunity that might be before them. And I think the sooner we can do that, the better. And in this case, if it was 16 million and we were able to allocate even 4 million, that would be potentially a 25% reduction. Again, not dollar for dollar, and I apologize, I'm trying to put numbers, but I'm trying to give the audience and the town a size of the prize thought and understand how important this project could be, exactly to David's point, because the number we've given them is very high, and we're doing our best to mitigate that as we go through the rest of this process.
That's correct. We don't have an exact number of what that impact is tonight,
right?
But we will be refining that shortly, because we know obviously that's, at the end of the day, as much as I'm sure everyone really enjoys hyper detailed financial policy analysis, that is what matters, is how it translates down into each person's betterment. So
understood.
Well taken, and we understand. We did not want to get ahead of ourselves and start putting estimates out too soon, because there is nothing, and that's part of why the estimated betterments are relatively high. We did not want to overpromise and underdeliver on something that has such a substantial impact to people's finances. So we're trying to be sensitive to that.
Understood. And I apologize. I'm trying not to set any expectations. Please don't hold anybody accountable for anything that I said. Just trying to conversationalize, I guess, a lot of financial information.
No, and I appreciate it, because I know a lot of this is bureaucratic jargon. Yes, that's the goal, to reduce the betterment cost that people are paying. And it is on us to get reasonable estimates for that soon to people so they can make an informed decision.
Thank you. Sorry, Victoria, completely hijacked a little bit your presentation.
She's going to take you with her to the next town.
No, as a matter of fact, I'm not, because the next town isn't doing betterments. As a matter of fact, Comoyne Associates it is not part of our scope to make those betterments estimates. We are providing, so when I'm talking about numbers here, and I will in just a minute, we're providing what the diff can generate in whole and on a year-by-year basis, and then the town is going to have exactly that conversation and that analysis that Connor described. And we will continue to provide, the best information that we can about revenue estimates, but you'll have that conversation. So when I'm presenting numbers, I'm talking about the potential new growth as a result of being able to build in the district, talking about increases to assessed value and potential tax revenues that could be generated and captured for your purposes. And I'm not specifically talking, I allude to it can help with the betterments, but I'm not making those calculations. So, detailed financial analysis, this is not actually all that detailed, so I will walk you through, this is all in the master plan. The new private investment, working with the town, talking about specifically the kinds of things that might be built based on our market analysis, our real estate analysis, what the town has heard people talking about they want to do, estimated just over $30 million increase in assessed value. At your current tax rate, assuming that tax rate never changes, over a period of 30 years, that's an estimated $14 million of new tax revenue that you don't have right now. That's not including any tax increases. That's an estimated $490,000 per year beginning in fiscal 2035. We are assuming that the growth takes a couple of years. Excuse me, 2025. Oh, yes, that would not be nearly as helpful as you want. So on an annual basis, approximately $490,000 that could be captured. So that's the result of the private investment and the incremental tax revenues generated by private people coming in and building where you want them to build. The capital plan, as we've said, estimates capturing 50% of that revenue, or approximately $246,000 a year. Over a period of 30 years, that's $7 million deposited into your DIF funds to be used to offset costs. Right now, the capital plan does also estimate that general obligation bonds would be authorized through their usual processes and issued for the sewer improvements. Those bonds would be repaid in part with DIF revenues in the current capital plan, in the master plan. Should the DIF revenues exceed what you believe you need for those sewer costs over time, because you've deposited the money in the specific accounts and you've listed projects in the master plan, roadway, street, other kinds of projects that can improve life within that district could be funded over time should the revenues be more than sufficient to meet your needs for the sewer. And finally, because we really can't say this enough, Easton is planning to capture $246,000 based on the estimate of the estimated growth, and the other $246,000 is going into your general fund for your plows and your schools and all of the things that a municipality does. And this is assuming no changes in tax revenues, no tax rates over that period of time. And we estimated very conservatively, as Stephanie has been saying, about the amount of new growth that would generate incremental revenue based on our analysis of the demand for homes and businesses in the town and in the region, given your location. It is probably more than that, but we did not want to put those numbers in the report. And I would also pause here and say, in the event that the DIF revenues exceed what is anticipated, you not only have more than $246,000 going into your DIF fund for projects in the district, you have more than $246,000 going into your general fund for all of the rest of the projects that the town needs to do. So growth in the DIF district in excess of that 30.8 million is going to help both sides of what the town wants to do. So we can come back to these with more questions, but I want to walk through what happens should the town at town meeting adopt the DIF district and development program. The ongoing tasks track very closely with things that the town is doing anyway. Your assessor will calculate the incremental new growth on the parcels. Your assessor is doing this for the whole town anyway. This is part of the assessor's regular job. There will be a certification every year as to what of that new growth was within the DIF district. That allows the finance department to calculate the incremental tax revenue associated just with the new growth, just in the Five Corners district. And I underline the word cumulative here, because say of that estimated 30 million in new growth coming in over 5 years, $5 million of new growth in year 1, $5 million of new growth in year 2, you're up to $10 million from which that revenue is being generated. So 30 million over time being added and building on the base of assessed value from which you can capture your increment. The DIF statute does require that it be deposited into a development program fund, and there are 2 accounts, one to pay debt and one to pay projects. And the debt service is paid from the one particular account. So the statute does require discipline that would not be a heavy lift for the town at all, having gotten to know you and how carefully you manage these things.
Victoria, is that requirement that we deposit the funds into that account, is that why it's important to be conservative with revenue estimates? Because once we make a commitment, we must deposit that amount into the funds?
It's not, there is no must deposit a certain amount. It's, you have to pay for your borrow. So we want to be conservative on our assumed funding available to pay for a borrow rather than be overly optimistic and borrow more than what we can reasonably anticipate to bring in through that incremental financing, because what you do not pay. Similarly, if there's additional funding, that's fantastic, that's gravy for a general fund. If you overshoot your estimation on how much you're going to bring in, that's an obligation, that's a debt. The town will pay it. We would just pay it through a general debt payment. And we don't want to set up a whole plan and program just to end up having to do it through the general fund.
Right. So I guess the reason why I asked that is we say the word conservative often, and I think it's just to make sure that we are on firm financial grounds as we go forward and have to make payments on this debt. It's not that we want to lessen the potential estimate of benefit.
That's right.
So that we're just potentially making less funds available to do with them. It's because we could put ourselves in a serious predicament of borrowing too much and not having the income, if it doesn't come to fruition, to pay it back.
That's correct.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you get $500,000 of DIF revenues and you have said you'll capture 50%, you get $250,000 in your account. If you get $1 million, you get $500,000 in your account. So being conservative is exactly what Connor explained, and as you also. Ongoing operation and management is also performed by economic development and planning. Generally, oversight and reporting, monitoring and evaluation, including project construction, working, of course, with other town departments. Oversight of the financial plan, making sure that the calculations are correct, that the money is deposited where it is supposed to be deposited and is not commingled with other town funds. Ensuring that they are audited along with all of the other town accounts audited. Most of these, I will say, are best practices. The statute says you must have funds and accounts. It does not, unlike your neighbor Connecticut, say, and they must be audited. But that is something that you would be doing anyway as a matter of good practice and good fiscal management. And similarly, periodic reporting to the town administrator and the selectmen is not required by the statute, but it is a very good practice, and all of the communities that we work with, we urge them. In fact, we simply tell them, you're going to do this because it is a good practice for your community, and you're doing it for your other important projects. So again, through all of this, the implementation of the DIF district is very similar to the way you might manage any other major undertaking within the town. And we're ending here with the steps that
Yeah.
Stephanie talked about.
So I covered those previously. Again, the next steps are going to be to hold the 2 public information sessions, one in March and one in April. We'll be scheduling those very shortly. There is a plan to have a final presentation. The master plan tonight is still a draft. Most of it we feel is very firm and won't change, but we will be finalizing that over the next month or so, and would come back to the Board of Selectmen and possibly in a joint meeting with the Finance Committee, the Budget Committee. So that would be a third meeting where, again, the public will be able to hear and learn more about it before we go to the town meeting vote on May 20th.
And so if we have questions on that, we just got that within the past couple of days, and it's
please.
42 pages.
Yes.
So if we dig into it and have questions, we can send them to you.
Sure, yes, absolutely.
And that goes for the interested public as well.
Right.
We have the DIF website where every time we have a public presentation, we put any of those materials online for folks who couldn't be here. So we'll have that online this week, and if anyone has any kind of specific questions, we're happy to get that feedback. Stephanie's information is on that page.
Yep.
What is that website?
So if you go to the town of Easton, easton.ma.us, and under boards and committees, you call up the planning department. There's a link on that page that says 5 Corners DIF feasibility study, and it will bring you right to the page with the DIF, right?
Right. It will. We haven't uploaded this master plan yet because we were just refining some of the points up until Friday, and wanted to make sure we got it to the Board of Selectmen, but we will be putting that out there tomorrow, so there'll be a link to the plan available for the public at large.
And there's also a fast shortcut to the page, just easton.ma.us/diff. Bypasses the directory and just goes right to the page.
And we can certainly put that in the town crier too, and as a news item on the homepage, so it'll direct people to that.
Questions? No. Come on up.
That's where we're at.
Again, Dale Carrister, 21 South Street, and again, along with a number of the folks here tonight, part of the Furnace Village Neighborhood Collaborative, and many of us were in attendance at the visioning meeting that you had in October over at Olmsted Richardson, and are fully supportive of all of this work that's being done. As to these issues, our group has 2 objectives, one of which is to work with the town in the hope of increasing the likelihood that all of this gets approved. So we're working on our end in terms of public education amongst our group, and beyond that to rally support behind it. Our second objective, frankly, is to try to increase the percentage of the funds that are coming from the DIF to be applied within the district. I know there's within the plan it references a 50-50 split, and to address an issue that David, you raised about the need for general fund amongst ourselves, we discussed that this is the kind of thing where likely folks around town will be raising their hands and say we'd like some of those funds to be used as well. From our point of view, we're hopeful actually to try to increase the percentage of the funds that would be applied within the district, and in particular to offset the assessment. And it's a fairly simple concept, I think, from our point of view, which we'd like the board to keep in mind. My understanding is that at some point in time, the board's going to vote to have a recommendation on a warrant. I presume the same would be from the Finance Committee, and then ultimately going to town meeting. And our hope that everybody will be mindful of what we're talking about here is tapping into the additional revenue that is resulting from the investment that is being put into for the sewer in this area. And further, to keep in mind that the cost of this investment is largely being paid for by the residents and the businesses in these areas. We understand the town setting aside certain financing for purposes of selling additional capacity at a future point in time. You set that aside, and otherwise what you're looking at is that the residents and the business owners are going to be required to pay this. A single betterment is estimated to be between $28,000 and $32,000, which we understand is significantly higher than other assessments for other sewer projects in town. And I don't know if it's due to the geography of the project, the amount of pipe that's being laid, and so forth, but please keep in mind that there are a lot of elderly residents in our district and folks who are on fixed income, and this is a huge, huge hit for them. Folks generally are supportive of the sewer project because we think it's a good idea. We have a very high water table where we are, a lot of failing systems. We understand that. Our folks in the area are going to be asked to invest in two ways, the $28,000 to $32,000, and as part of that, for those who are then connecting, the additional connection fee. This is going to be a lot of money for a lot of folks who are going to be spending in $40,000, $50,000 if these costs, come to bear. We're also going to be investing in a second way, which is that ultimately this new revenue is associated with additional development within the district, and that means more cars. You're going to be having over at the Foundry project. Presumably additional development in the business area on the Five Corners area with additional usage, additional traffic. The folks largely who are going to be bearing the brunt of it will be those who live and are working in the area. So we're hopeful that when it does come time to vote on these issues and recommendations, that we actually would consider bumping up the percentages that would be applied to reduce the costs for the folks who are really being asked to bear the brunt of this investment, both in the form of the assessments that are being attributed to them, and secondly for the results of the additional development in what is our residents. We all understand when we moved into the area, it was called Furnace Village. We understand it started off with industrial business usage. We all get that. We're in favor of this work going on, but we just don't want to lose sight that a lot of folks live here, and folks who are on the business side, some are being asked, to have an assessment of about $500,000. It's a lot of money for folks. So we're hopeful as we move forward on the process. We'd like to have some input, in terms of a voice to be heard about trying to bump up the percentages that get reinvested back into the district in the form of allaying some of the costs that folks are having to pay out of pocket, and also improvements in the area to address some of the increased traffic that's associated with the additional development. So thank you, everybody, for your consideration.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.
A comment I'd like to make, not directly to the percentages and the input and everything, but is as we go out and we do the public input sessions, because this is a town meeting vote, and it means that a majority of the residents of Easton need to vote for this. I think making the point that the town as a whole benefits, so while the residents who have to pay the betterments, the intent is to try to reduce those costs, and you benefit from that. But by promoting the new growth, as you point out, by being able to support new growth in that area, the intent is to generate more revenue that also goes to the general fund and benefits the town as a whole. So I think that's an important point for people across the town to understand.
Right, I also, toward that end, want to understand, I think Victoria had mentioned something that in some other DIF projects, they apply 100% towards it. We understand we're not trying to advocate for that, and we understand that there also is an impact on the town as a whole in terms of the additional developments and so forth. So we're mindful of that, and as we move forward, so we'd like to work hand in hand with the town, ultimately what works for everybody, but in particular with an understanding of the unique impacts of the folks who have businesses and or living in the district.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of feedback is great for the other public meetings, so we encourage people to attend those too.
We'll be there.
All right, any other questions?
Kathy Weiss, 106 Gaslight Lane. I just want to make everyone aware that many of the people that live in the condos on Gaslight, et cetera, we are only allowed to call our condos a one-bedroom because of zoning, and yet, from what I understand, we're going to be charged a betterment fee based on a 3-bedroom home, 4 bedrooms, so I would ask that that calculation be looked at fairly and accurately.
If I may, that's a good point. and we actually have, not every condo will be assessed a comparable betterment to a 3 or 4 bedroom home. We are continuing to refine that formula, but one of the things that we did do is start looking at kind of a sliding scale that also takes square footage of condos into consideration, because there are some that are quite small, and it would not be reasonable to assess them the same as a 3 or 4 bedroom home. So we are working on that.
Can I ask a follow-up question to Kathy's? I discussed this issue with Kathy before. I think what she's actually maybe focusing on as well is, to the extent that there are restrictions being imposed on the condo owners, how they identify the number of bedrooms. So I believe when the condos were developed in the first place, that there was some restriction put in place, perhaps from the owner, regardless of the number of rooms, how they were able to characterize it for selling purposes.
Okay.
And if I understand correctly, what the folks from the condos are interested in making sure of, if they're going to be assessed on the basis that it is equivalent of a 3-bedroom, that they are allowed to be able to market their property as if it's a 3-bedroom and not subject to an old restriction. So I don't know what the process would be on that, but I think that's what the intent would be, and I think they'd like, the folks from the condos would like to open up some dialogue about that.
A good point. Well taken. Thank
Well
you.
taken.
Anyone else? Well,
I agree with Dale. Oh, go ahead. I think it's really
Sorry, could we
important,
get the
as
name
much
and-
as I like Dale's point about, how do we allocate more towards me, towards Tom Callahan for my betterment costs. But we have to educate for the town meeting everyone on that split so that we have a majority. You don't have to sell people in this room, yeah, we'd like a higher percentage, but how do we kind of isolate that, executive summary it or something, so they know, oh, by the way, the money generated, there is some going somewhere else other than to these, people in the betterment area.
Well, I think that's the point that I just made, which we hadn't talked about previously, that the sewer project and the new development that we're anticipating in the Five Corners district benefits the town as a whole. I mean, that's one of the reasons the town made a commitment to sewer the area. Aside from the fact that there are private homeowners who are affected because they, might have failing septic systems, new growth in the district has been stymied for a number of years. Growth that could occur under the existing zoning, but because of the lack of proper wastewater treatment, it just can't happen. So any growth in that area, any money that's going into the general fund that's more than would have been realized without the sewer is benefiting the town as a whole, because that money can be used and will be used for the benefit of the town as a whole. So those are points. And so what we would be asking you, and we'll talk about this at the public meeting, because the plan is that the first meeting, we are going to personally invite everyone from the district. It will be open to the public as well, but we ask that you also help communicate that out to your fellow residents.
Non-betterment footprint people.
Yeah, because that's what they.
Footprint.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to do that through all of our means of social media outreach, through the website. We have Donna here, who is with the newspaper, stories about that and so forth. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure there's a good showing and a good understanding before we get to town meeting. The goal is we do not want to get to town meeting and have this be the first time that people are hearing about it. So we're really trying hard to make sure that it gets out there.
Right. And again, we don't want anyone to lose sight of the fact that the reason for moving forward with the construction of the sewer is to benefit the town at large.
I'd like to put a face on the cost of this project. And while it's a substantial cost to everyone in the district, whether you're a homeowner or whether you're a business owner, the project, I think, is weighted heavily for business owners to bear the cost. I'm on the hook for, I think it's 17 betterment units off the top of my head. If you multiply that cost out and you include the connection fees and you include the interest that we're going to have to pay to finance the project, and you include the lost revenue over the course of the year of construction, I am personally on the hook for an excess of $1 million. That is a substantial, devastating amount of money to me, my family, the equity that I've spent a lifetime to build. So when you take the time to consider how much percentage you're going to give us, how much percentage you're going to give everybody in the district, I'd like you to take that under consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Any other questions from the public? Okay. Nothing from the board? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Well
you for
done.
coming out
Thank you.
tonight. Okay, next up is the town administrator presentation. Does the board want to take a couple-minute break before that? Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Sounds good.
Yep.
They're on retainer.
Wayne know that we're going to come back.
Well, just let me confirm.
Okay, welcome back, and thank you for letting us take that brief recess. We are going to take something out of schedule a little bit here. We had on our agenda a possible executive session, and I'd like to recommend that we move that up on the agenda, do that now, and come back to open session for the last couple of items on the agenda. So I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session under Purpose 3 of Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 21A, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares, to discuss litigation in relation to A.J. Virgilio Construction, discuss litigation related to A.J. Virgilio Construction Incorporated, and litigation relating to a non-union personnel, Timothy Griffin. So I'll make that motion to adjourn into executive session to return back to open session when that's concluded.
Second.
And that's a roll call vote.
King, yes?
Broussard, yes.
Barger, yes?
Full Janetti, yes?
Dills, yes.
Thank you, everyone.
warm in that room, too.
Okay, we are back from our executive session, and we're going to have, the next item is the town meetings, the town administrator's presentation of the preliminary fiscal year 2020 operating budget.
Connor, is this the same that we had from the budget subcommittee?
It is not.
It is not, okay.
Before we do that, should I make a motion to table the community comparison to the next meeting, or are we going to briefly touch on that tonight?
I would recommend tabling it.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to table item I, the town administrator presentation community comparison report, to our next meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous.
All right, let's go.
Sorry, who was the second one? Percent?
Hi, Wendy.
Hey, Wendy.
So thank you, Dottie. We'll take up the community comparison report next meeting before 10 o'clock tonight. I will try to very briefly review this presentation. Earlier today, I sent the preliminary fiscal year 2020 operating budget to the Board of Selectmen. Tomorrow, we'll go to the Finance Committee, School Committee, all the department heads, the press, so they can take a look at it, and we'll be working on this in the coming months leading up to town meeting in May. So again, just for background information, this is kind of showing where we are in this budget process. Anything green up there is a public review process. Tonight is the first of many nights that this operating budget will be reviewed. So in overview, fiscal year 2020 is going to be another challenging year for the town of Easton. The structural revenue deficit born out of the last recession persists, and it is continuing to constrain our ability to deliver services to our residents. Historically positive growth revenue categories such as local receipts have begun to slow down in recent years. State aid continues to remain nearly flat, and reserve fund use in the budget is projected to be cut even further than it was in fiscal 19. Which is a good thing from a fiscal stewardship perspective, but nonetheless it reduces the funding available that we have for appropriation and tightens those available dollars we have to fund our services. The preliminary departmental budgets fund only level services with limited exception, with expense growth driven largely by fixed costs. The preliminary expenditure projection of $87,234,000 exceeds our projected revenues of $85,333,000, resulting in a preliminary projected deficit of $1.9 million. So looking at the revenue side of the house first, cities and towns in Massachusetts are limited in their ability to increase property tax to 2.5% each year plus new growth. As you can see from the pie graph illustrated above, Easton's revenue by category is overwhelmingly driven by taxation. State aid comes in next at 16%, then local receipts at 9%, and 2% coming from other funding sources. Our total revenue is projected to increase just shy of 3% in fiscal 20 for a total just over $85 million. The preliminary fiscal 20 budget is projecting an increase in total tax revenue of 3.62%, which is just over $2 million. It's going to bring our tax levy to $58.6 million. As time passes and other revenue sources continue to underperform, like state aid, our reliance on taxation as a percentage of our total revenue increases. That places a premium on incentivizing new growth, which is largely the driver of our very detailed conversations tonight about infrastructure investment, things of that nature. As you can see in the table above, Easton's revenue, taxation as a percentage of our total revenue is obviously increasing in real dollars every year as the levy increases. Excuse me. But it is also increasing as a total percentage of our revenue. That places an incentive on the town's ability to generate and expand that tax base through new growth. We do that through zoning reform, through infrastructure investment, through streamlining permitting and making it easier to do business in Easton. And also, new growth is largely driven by broader market trends, which you can see by looking at the shape of this graph as it tracked to the recession. New growth hit a peak in fiscal 18 at just over $1 million. This was largely driven by the Avalon project, which accounted for $418,000 of that. In fiscal 19, we certified new growth at $865,000, which exceeded our projection of $700,000. And the preliminary budget for 20 is projecting a growth of 700, which is lesser, obviously, than our actuals in 18 and 19. However, it does track within that kind of 5-year average if you look between 15 and today. We want to be conservative at this point of the process. Local receipts are composed, that's another critical revenue category for us. Local receipts are composed of things like motor vehicle excise tax, ambulance fees, local meals taxes. They've been steadily growing in recent years, but that growth leveled off in between fiscal 18 receipts declined from 17, mainly due to a reduction in building permit revenue, again associated with some one-time large projects like Avalon. They don't recur every year. You see a drop off in some revenue there. This is an area that Wendy and I have been cautioning for years that it has certainly been a bright spot in our budget, but we were not anticipating that that kind of 5, 6, 7% growth in this category would persist every single year. The preliminary 20 budget is projecting a modest increase of $143,000, which is 2% in this revenue category, to put it at $7.3 million. State aid. The town's most significant and persistent revenue challenge is the marginal growth to state aid that we receive and have been receiving following cuts to this revenue source during the recession years. As the graph above illustrates, state aid reached a peak in Easton in fiscal year 2008, from which it declined until fiscal 11, taking until fiscal 2016 to recover. So you have basically 8 years of lost time there. The preliminary budget projects a marginal increase to state aid of just shy of $170,000, which is 1.32%, for a total of $12.9 million. That's based on Governor Baker's 2020 budget for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That number will be updated as the budget process rolls along. However, we're challenged on both sides of the ledger from the state, so we have another year of marginal increases to that revenue, in this case just over 1%. However, the increase in assessments to the town, so the town has to pay certain fees back to the state, we're looking at an increase of 43% in our assessments to the state, so that's over $300,000, largely driven by a $301,000